Chapter 186. The conflict that was about to break out was temporarily stopped because of Yuan Mie's arrival. Whether it was Xia Yubing or Yi Guqin, they didn't want to fight and let Yuan Mie take advantage of the situation. Although Yuan Mie had helped him before, Yi Guqin knew that Yuan Mie didn't help him out of kindness. Coupled with the rumors he had heard before, Yi Guqin knew that Yuan Mie just wanted to create more trouble for Prince Yuanyi. In other words, Yuan Mie wanted to use Yi Guqin as a tool. Even so, Yuan Mie had helped him once. Yi Guqin nodded at Yuan Mie. Yuan Mie didn't have any reaction, but his single eye that was as still as the night took a deep look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin felt a faint threat. Yuan Mie, who possessed darkness sword intent, absolutely couldn't be underestimated. But fortunately, there wasn't any conflict between him and Yuan Mie for the time being, and they even had a common enemy. After Yuan Mie's arrival, the whole atmosphere once again fell into a suffocating solemnity. But a delicate balance was maintained, and no one dared to casually act again. They waited like this for a full day. A day later, in the ancient stone forest, the gradually weakening ceiling formation finally couldn't withstand the erosion of time, and it collapsed with a loud crash accompanied by the sound of glass shattering. And the moment the ceiling formation collapsed, an extremely powerful wave of energy swept out like a volcanic eruption. That wave of energy was far more powerful than that of an ordinary expert's cave dwelling, causing the ground to tremble and wind and sand to sweep across the world. This is... Yi Guqin's face was filled with shock. The scene of fighting for the North River Sword King's cave dwelling still remained in his mind. At that time, when the Sword King mystic realm appeared, although the fluctuations were extremely intense, it seemed to be weaker than the fluctuations of this cave abode. The North River Sword King is an expert of the divine dwelling stage, and the undulations emitted from this cave dwelling are even stronger than the Sword King's. Could it be? Yi Guqin came to an extremely shocking conclusion. None of the Sky Prides who could persevere till now were pushovers. Naturally, they weren't fools. They knew that the aura of this cave was way too strong. Could it be the abode of an honorable from the heavenly palace? One of the heaven's favorites asked hoarsely. His eyes were filled with shock. At the divine dwelling stage, a divine dwelling had been established in one's chi si. One could move unhindered in the South Horizon region and was also known as a king realm expert. For example, the North River Sword King was an expert of the divine dwelling stage, so he could be called a king. As for the heavenly palace realm, one's sea of consciousness could forge a heavenly palace. Even in the entire South Horizon region, they were ranked at the peak and were also known as venerables. It was no wonder that these heaven prides were shocked. In a place like the Saint Origin Empire, the king of the divine dwelling stage was already an unattainable peak. As for the more powerful venerables of the heaven palace realm, they had almost never appeared. Is it really the abode of a venerables of the heavenly palace realm? Yi Guqin looked around. Whether it was the participating heaven prides, bandits or unaffiliated cultivators, everyone's eyes were blazing with desire. Their red eyes were like hungry wolves. A divine dwelling stage abode had created a heaven prideful girl like Xia Yubing. How valuable would the abode of a venerables of the heavenly palace be? Almost everyone's eyes were red, and their hearts were filled with excitement. Only Yi Guqin's black eyes remained as calm as an ancient well. The abode of a divine dwelling stage expert was already extremely dangerous. How could the abode of a venerables be so simple? Just as the ceiling array formation of the Venerable One's cave abode collapsed, the 7 major forces and many spectators outside the infinite planes, who had been watching through the 10,000 miles sky survey mirror, also sensed the vast waves coming from the planes. This wave of energy is... The higher-ups of the 7 great forces couldn't sit still any longer. The divine dwelling stage, no, it's a stage even more vast than the divine dwelling stage. Could it be the abode of a venerables of the heavenly palace? Xian Tai of the limitless sword sect was shaken. He could no longer sit still, and he rose to his feet and soared into the air. Let's go. Feng Manlu slowly rose to his feet from the sword sect's tower. Although he was blind, his spiritual sense was extremely sharp. He directly led the group of people from the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and flew away. Immediately afterwards, the 3 imperial palaces, the 9 Profound Sect, the Sealed Saber Royal Hall, the Rhinoceros Divine Palace and the other forces also hurriedly left. As the people of the 7 great forces left, some spectators could no longer sit still. Among the spectators, there was no lack of experts at the life and death threshold and world spirit bridge stage. Soon after, the news of the Venerable's cave dwelling's appearance also spread among the crowd, setting off an uproar. A Venerable's cave dwelling has appeared. There will be a good show to watch this time. If any heaven prides can obtain a Venerable's cave dwelling, the 7 great forces will most likely fight over it. Let's go and take a look. This is definitely the final battle between heaven prides of the elite gathering. Rumble. There were tens of thousands of spectators, and they all rushed towards the Venerable's cave dwelling's appearance. From afar, it looked like a black tide was surging like ants, and the scene was rather spectacular. Qin Baijian and the other 2, who had a grudge against Yi Guqin, also flew into the air. In the middle of the crowd, Shui, who was being squeezed back and forth, also staggered as she followed the crowd. It could be said that the appearance of a Venerable's cave dwelling had affected everyone's hearts. At that moment, in the infinite plains, outside the ancient stone forest. Although the ceiling formation had already collapsed, what was rare was that no one stepped into it first. Even though everyone present was breathing heavily and their eyes were red, no one dared to act rashly. How could a Venerable's cave dwelling be so easy to investigate? If they were not careful, they might lose their lives inside. It was also because of this that the scene fell into a strange silence. In this silence, everyone suddenly felt that the ground beneath their feet seemed to be trembling. Did we trigger some formation mechanism? Some heaven prides asked suspiciously. No. Some people turned their heads and saw the figures rushing over in the sky, as well as the crowd on the ground surging over like a tide of ants. It's the 7 great forces and the spectators outside. This aura is stronger than the divine dwelling stage. It's indeed a Venerable's cave dwelling. Xian Tai stood in the air, his cold eyes, which had always been dignified, unable to conceal the fire in them at this moment. A Venerable's cave dwelling was an irresistible temptation for any force. If it weren't for the fact that the 10 prefectures elite gathering was still ongoing and they couldn't break the rules, Xian Tai would have directly sent a message to the Limitless Sword Sect to occupy the Venerable's cave dwelling. I am the master of the Limitless Sword Sect's Sun Moon Hall, Xian Tai. If anyone can obtain this Venerable's cave dwelling, the doors of the Sun Moon Hall will be open to them, and they will receive the same resources and treatment as Xian Hao. Xian Tai's hands were clasped behind his back as his loud voice spread in all directions. His words made the eyes of many participating heaven prides turn red with envy. Not only would they be able to directly enter the Sun Moon Hall, but they would also receive the same treatment as Xian Hao. Xian Hao was a sword Dao genius that the Limitless Sword Sect had poured all their resources into, and his status was extraordinary. The heaven prides that obtain the Venerable's cave dwelling will receive guidance from the Hall Master of the titled Saber King Hall, and all the resources will be open to them, said an upper echelon of the titled Saber King Hall. The same goes for the Consonant's Divine Palace. The upper echelons of the various great forces all spoke up. It was obvious that they were determined to obtain the Venerable's cave dwelling. Due to the rules set by the 7 great forces, they couldn't fight for the cave dwelling. They could only pay the price to rope in the heaven prides that obtained the cave dwelling. Among the great forces, only Feng Manlu of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest didn't speak up. Elder Qing He, Chu Qingqi and the others were somewhat anxious as they looked at Feng Manlu. But Feng Manlu acted as if he hadn't heard anything. He didn't speak, nor did he make any tempting promises. Chapter 187. Although Feng Manlu didn't say anything, the promises of the other 6 factions were enough to ignite the flames in the hearts of the participating prodigies. Finally, someone couldn't hold back the greed and desire in his heart and directly flew into the ancient stone forest. This action seemed to have set off a chain reaction. In just a few breaths of time, Figures rushed into the stone forest like locusts. "Let's go too," Yi Guqin said. His tone was neither hurried nor slow. Then, Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, and the others directly entered. On the other side, Xia Yubing, Yuan Mia, and the gray-robed man, Hong Chenxua, also entered. In addition, even Song Daozhen, Chu Shiqing, and the others had persevered until now and also entered the stone forest. The 7 factions didn't say anything about these people who wanted to enter the Venerable One's cave abode. Although they were determined to obtain the Venerable One's cave abode, the resources inside were clearly not something that the Qi refinement realm cultivators could snatch away. Therefore, the 7 factions didn't care about letting them enter first to obtain the opportunities. After all, when they came out, the prodigies would still decide who would obtain the cave abode. The person who would belong to the cave abode was the one they were fighting for. As soon as Yi Guqin entered the stone forest, he felt that this place was unusual. From the outside, it looked like an ancient stone forest that had been weathered by the wind. However, as soon as Yi Guqin and the others entered, they saw that the surrounding fog was thick and obstructing their vision. The stone pillars that stood tall had faint formation runes flowing on them. They weren't ceiling formation runes, nor were they offensive formations. "Is this a maze formation?" Yi Guqin's tone was solemn. Although a maze formation didn't have any offensive power, it was more terrifying than an offensive formation in many cases. Not only did a maze formation confuse the mind, but it could also wear down a person's willpower. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, they might go crazy in a few days and become a headless fly. Yi Guqin had the 6 Dao Ashura sword formation and had some understanding of formations. Although he hadn't reached the Grandmaster realm, he could still inspect it. Just as Yi Guqin was about to inspect the formation, Zither Fairy spoke up, "Young Master Dugu, leave it to me." "Zither Fairy, do you have a way to break this maze formation?" Yi Guqin asked. "We can try." Zither Fairy pursed her lips and smiled, once again summoning her zither. Her slender fingers plucked the zither strings, and the zither music flowed out like a clear spring. It didn't have the lethality of the previous battle. Instead, it was incomparably pleasant to the ear. Yi Guqin would have liked to sit down quietly and listen to the sound of the zither if it were not for the fact that it was not the right time. Seeing Yi Guqin's gaze, "Zither Zither Fairy, Zither Fairies, Zither Fairy." She was known as Zither Fairy. If she couldn't conquer others with her zither music, then she wouldn't be able to live up to her reputation. "If young Master Duga likes my zither music, I can play for you every day." Zither Fairy's eyes twinkled. Yi Guqin was about to speak when Su Jianshi said with a sour tone, "Sure enough, a beauty who knows how to play the zither is very attractive." "Don't you think so, silly boy?" "Well, I don't know music. I'm afraid I'll be letting you down." Yi Guqin shook his head with a wry smile. Zither Fairy pursed her lips and didn't say anything. As the zither music spread out, the layout of the surrounding terrain was also under her control. Zither Fairy said, "I know the general route. Let's go to the center of the stone forest." She didn't use her eyes to determine the direction, but the feedback from the zither. The maze formation could confuse the eyes, but it couldn't confuse the ears. With Zither Fairy guiding the way, Yi Guqin's group sped up. But not long after, there was a sudden scream not far away. "Everyone, be careful." Yi Guqin took out his meteor soft sword. Su Jianshi and Bai Yanji stood guard on the left and right while Zither Fairy led the way in the center. But as they went deeper, the screams became more intense. Whoosh! A black shadow suddenly shot out from the side, heading in Bai Yanji's direction. "What's that?" Bai Yanji was slightly taken aback and casually sent out a palm strike. A palm strike landed on the black shadow, but to everyone's surprise, the black shadow directly pierced through the true qi and headed straight for Bai Yanji's face. Whoosh! A blood-red sword ray slashed across and sliced the black shadow in half. Yi Guqin's group looked carefully and found that it was a pitch-black worm with a sharp mouth. "This is a spirit-sucking worm," Yi Guqin's group said with a serious tone. Spirit-sucking worms had a special ability to be immune to true qi. After entering a person's body, they would directly enter the qi sea to absorb true qi until the qi sea dried up. In a way, they were similar to blood-sucking worms, except that they absorbed true qi. Ordinary spirit-sucking worms were only rank 2 demonic beasts and could be easily killed. But the danger of spirit-sucking worms was that they didn't move alone, but in groups. One could imagine how terrifying it would be to be surrounded by a large group of spirit-sucking worms that were immune to true qi attacks. Let's go quickly. There must be many spirit-sucking worms in this ancient stone forest. Yiguchen's group looked at each other and ran quickly. But the death of one spirit-sucking worm would attract a large group of spirit-sucking worms. Along with the buzzing sounds, a large group of spirit-sucking worms surrounded them like an ant tide. Kill! Yiguchen slowly raised his hand and the heavenly sun Xianming fire burst out. The flames alternated between extreme heat and cold, forming a fire tide that collided with the swarm of spirit-sucking worms. Countless hissing sounds could be heard as the swarm of spirit-sucking worms was burned into pitch-black powder. Heaven and earth flame. Zither Fairy and the others were delighted to see this. Heaven and earth flame had a restraining effect on all kinds of snakes and insects. So this swarm of spirit-sucking worms, which others would avoid like tigers and wolves, was not much of a threat to Yiguchen. Yiguchen used the heavenly sun Xianming fire to form a flame shield that enveloped Su Jianshi, Zither Fairy, and Bai Yanji. As the flames spread, the surrounding spirit-sucking worms retreated in fear. Not long after, Yiguchen's group rushed through the swarm of spirit-sucking worms and reached the center of the stone forest. Yiguchen dispersed the flaming air shield and glanced at the surroundings. Compared to the large group of people who had entered the ancient stone forest, only 10 or 20% of them could solve the maze and break through the swarm of spirit-sucking worms. Many of them were injured. That should be the entrance to the cave. Yiguchen looked over. In the center of the stone forest, 9 stone pillars were arranged in a circle, forming array patterns on the ground. The center was as dark as a hole. Looking at the Venerable One's cave, it should also be underground. Let's go. Yiguchen waved his hand without hesitation. Chapter 188. As they rushed down the pitch-black cave, Yiguchen and the others could clearly feel the pressure that belonged to the Venerable One. A sky palace venerable. Even after death, his aura was still shocking. This underground cave was surrounded by fluorescent lights. The surrounding cave walls were inlaid with naturally glowing ores, illuminating the interior of the cave. There are fluctuations of a battle ahead. Yiguchen and the others felt the fluctuations of true qi coming from ahead. They all rushed over. After a while, Yiguchen saw it. Spiritual qi was surging in front of them. It was an underground fertile land with many spiritual herbs growing there. Many experts were fighting over them. It's an herb field. Zither Fairy's beautiful eyes flashed. Although this herb field isn't big, the soil is the rare spiritual crystal soil. This soil is most suitable for spiritual herbs to grow. Bai Yanji's eyes also flashed with a strange light. Spiritual crystal soil was expensive, but it filled up an entire herb field. It was obvious that the Sky Palace Venerable was very generous. There are treasured herbs. Su Jianshi pointed. Treasured herbs were rarer than spiritual herbs. Naturally, their value was higher. Moreover, treasured herbs that grew in spiritual crystal soil would have purer and more vigorous medicinal effects. Without hesitation, Yiguchen and the others immediately started to fight. No one would complain about having too many treasured herbs. When the warriors fighting for treasured herbs saw Yiguchen and the others arrive, their expressions changed. They retreated a little, not daring to compete with them. Not long after, Yiguchen obtained a few treasured herbs. His gaze once again turned to another part of the herb field. He found a fruit that looked like a baby. It emitted a faint soul fluctuation. It's the infant soul fruit. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. The infant soul fruit was not only a supreme-grade treasured herb, but it was also a rare treasured herb that greatly benefited soul power. This treasured herb that nourished soul power would be of great help in breaking through to the divine soul realm. Yiguchen did not hesitate. He moved his feet and reached out to grab the infant soul fruit. At this moment, a sharp sword aura suddenly tore through the air. Yiguchen raised his eyebrows slightly. He gently raised his hand and true energy gushed out from his fingertips. A six-pulse divine sword aura shot out and collided with the sword aura. He turned his head and saw that it was Xia Yubing and the others. As for the person who had unleashed the sword, it was Murong Ditian. As expected, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Su Jianshi and the others were on high alert. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes swept over the infant soul fruit, but she did not reveal much interest. Obviously, she, who possessed the inheritance of the North River Sword King, did not lack treasures like the infant soul fruit that could nourish her soul force. However, to others, especially those geniuses who were at the 9th refinement stage and were about to break through to the divine soul stage, the infant soul fruit was extremely attractive. I want this infant soul fruit. Murong Ditian spoke. They seemed to have reached some sort of agreement. Prince Yuani and Shintu Miao did not say anything. That will depend on whether you have the qualifications. Yiguchen held the meteor soft sword in his hand, his gaze sharp. Dugu Wubai, although you are strong, you are not undefeatable. Even when facing Yiguchen, Murong Ditian was still confident. Great splashing wind sword, wind god's howl. Murong Ditian's long sword, which was covered in bandages, suddenly appeared. Although it was not unsealed, there was still a sharp sword aura gushing out. The valiant sword aura was like a tornado as it swept towards Yiguchen. Bring out your true abilities. If you use such probing methods, it is meaningless. Yiguchen swung his sword. The meteor sword's edge flickered with a blood-like radiance. A blood slaughter shot out and destroyed Murong Ditian's attack. To deal with you, I really need to use my true abilities. Murong Ditian laughed. He slowly raised his hand and bit his finger. After that, he slowly smeared the blood on the long sword that was covered in bandages. Yiguchen's gaze turned serious. Murong Ditian's sword always gave him an indescribable sense of danger. Scour Luo sword, unseal. Murong Ditian shouted coldly. The bandages that were stained with blood flowed with blood-colored runes. After that, the bandages suddenly opened, revealing an ancient sword. This ancient sword's body was mottled. It was dark red in color, as if it had once drunk human blood. Spiritual runes were engraved on it. Vaguely, there seemed to be some sort of connection. Could this be? Yiguchen looked at the ancient sword. He could vaguely feel an extremely sharp sword aura. This is my Murong family's ancestral hall's divine weapon with mystical runes. In the end, only I received their recognition and obtained this Scour Luo sword. Although it no longer has the might of a divine weapon with mystical runes, it is still considered a top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes. Being able to die under the Scour Luo sword is your fortune. Murong Ditian said proudly. Top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes. The surrounding crowd looked at Murong Ditian and exclaimed in shock. One must know that Prince Yuani relied on his high-grade divine weapon with mystical runes, the heavenly sacred five-element wheel, to squeeze into the ranks of the prodigies. Not to mention that Murong Ditian was originally a prodigy with decent strength. With the addition of his top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. Top-grade divine weapon with mystical runes? This is interesting. Yiguchen didn't have any fear. Instead, he was a little interested. Originally, I wanted to wait for Yiguchen to arrive before unsealing the Scour Luo sword and killing him. However, it's a pity that he was a coward. Therefore, I can only let you suffer. Murong Ditian said coldly. He hated Yiguchen to the bone. Originally, he wanted to unseal the Scour Luo sword and kill him. However, he discovered that he didn't arrive. Of course, This was what Murong Ditien didn't know. The Dugu Wubai in front of him was Yi Guqian, whom he hated to the bone. Swish! Murong Ditien drew his sword. As he drew his sword, an intense sword aura was released. The Scour Luo sword exploded with an extremely sharp sword light. As for Yi Guqian, he circulated the Azura power in his body. It spread along the edge of the sword. An extremely dense blood-red color entangled with the sword, giving off waves of fluctuations. Yi Guqian drew his sword. A demonic sword. Bringing along an intense blood-red sword aura, he clashed with Murong Ditien. The rest of the people from both sides also made their moves at almost the same time, engaging in a chaotic battle. As the two sides fought, true energy violently surged and ripples spread out. This caused those cultivators who wanted to snatch the spiritual herbs in the medicine field to curse inwardly. Shortly after, they hurriedly retreated. If they were caught in the crossfire, they would only be the unlucky ones. Although Bai Yanji, Zither Fairy, and the rest weren't as powerful as Shintu Miao and the rest, they could still delay them. As for Su Jianshi, she was entangled with Xia Yubing, preventing her from making a move. Boom! Yi Guqian's sword collided with Murong Ditien once again. Feeling the intense rebounding force from the sword, Yi Guqian's eyes were filled with astonishment. If his meteor soft sword wasn't a divine weapon that was refined 100,000 times, the Scour Luo sword would have caused cracks to appear on it. The infant soul fruit is mine. Murong Ditien activated the spirit patterns on the Scour Luo sword. In an instant, an even more powerful sword aura erupted, sending Yi Guqian flying. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the infant soul fruit. Yi Guqian's finger flickered, and rays of 6 pulse divine sword aura tore through the air. Murong Ditien turned around and blocked with his sword. Yi Guqian executed wave-like subtle steps. His figure flashed as he grabbed the infant soul fruit. Give it to me. Murong Ditien's expression turned serious as he executed the mysterious Heaven Sword Arts minor trump card. Sword Sweeping 8 Desolation. 8 vigorous and domineering sword auras covered the sky as they swept over. With the support of the Scour Luo sword, their might was even more powerful. Yellow Spring. Yi Guqian also activated the power of Azura and executed the third move of the god-slaying sword art. A mighty sword aura blood river suddenly surged out and collided with the 8 sword auras. Boom! The violent sword auras actually tore the medicine field below into 2 halves. And in the split medicine field, a strange dark green branch appeared. It was a somewhat withered branch with 5 leaves that looked like they were carved from jade. On the leaves, there seemed to be a mysterious aura spreading out. That is. Everyone's gaze instantly froze. Chapter 189. When the jade green branch appeared, all the skyprides present could feel a strange Taoist rhyme. It was as if their minds were instantly enlightened. Could that be the legendary Path Understanding Tree's branch? Some geniuses were bewildered. The Path Understanding Ancient Tree was a legendary panacea. Compared to medicine, its greatest effect was to aid in one's comprehension. It was rumored that a single leaf from the Path Understanding Ancient Tree could allow one to comprehend the grand Tao of heaven and earth. Not only that, with the assistance of the Path Understanding Tree's leaf, one would be able to comprehend all kinds of complicated martial arts, secret techniques, and so on. It could be said that even among the rare panacea, the Path Understanding Ancient Tree was the rarest. It's really the Path Understanding Ancient Tree's branch. This is a panacea, a true panacea. The surrounding geniuses' eyes were red as they stared at the withered branch that only had 5 dark green leaves left. If spiritual panacea was considered common and treasured panacea was considered rare, then panacea was a truly rare existence. Its rarity was comparable to that of heavenly lightning and other strange items. Even with the 7 major forces foundation, they only possessed quasi-panacea that were close to the level of panacea. It could be said that true panacea could only be possessed by those top-notch sects and families of the South Horizon region. Go! At this moment, everyone's eyes were red. Even though Yi Guqin, Xia Yubing, and the others were present, they didn't care anymore. Because the value of the path understanding ancient tree's leaf was too high. As long as one could obtain a leaf, it was possible to thoroughly comprehend a spiritual martial art and cultivate it to an extremely profound realm. This kind of opportunity could only be encountered and not sought. Let's go too. Yi Guqin and the others also directly attacked. Xia Yubing included. Previously, she didn't care much about the infant soul fruit, but now that the path understanding ancient tree's branch appeared, Xia Yubing's eyes were also burning with passion. Even experts like the North River Sword King wouldn't be able to obtain such a panacea. Murong Ditian also gave up on snatching the infant soul fruit from Yi Guqin and directly grabbed the path understanding ancient tree's branch. In just a moment, because of the appearance of the path understanding ancient tree's branch, an even more desperate chaotic battle started. Boom! 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 The weaker sky prides were directly blasted out of the herb field, vomiting mouthfuls of blood. Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps. His figure was like a ghost as he moved between the numerous figures. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the branch. Suddenly, a cold sword light swept over. Yi Guqin's face darkened. He swept out his meteorite soft sword, and a blood-red sword light burst out, colliding with the sword light. Xia Yubing's figure was graceful as she activated a trace of ice sword intent. The surrounding air was filled with cold air, and it seemed as if the air was about to freeze. Xia Yubing was determined to obtain the Tao Comprehension Leaf. After all, the Tao Comprehension Leaf was extremely beneficial towards comprehending sword intent. From this point of view, Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin's goals were the same. As Xia Yubing's cold qi spread out, those geniuses who didn't have the strength to fight were forced back. Those who were able to stay behind all had some ability. Yi Guqin activated the Heavenly Sun Profound Underworld Fire to isolate the cold qi emitted by Xia Yubing. On the other side, Su Jianchu's figure twisted as her figure flashed and arrived beside the Tao Comprehension Leaf's branch. Just as she was about to reach out, Murong Ditian's sword swept out. With the Mara sword's power, this sword's might was shocking. Damn it, are you going to destroy the Tao Comprehension Leaf? Su Jianchu ground her teeth as she retreated. Boom! Sword qi exploded, and that withered branch was directly shattered by the sword qi. At this moment, many gazes filled with killing intent turned towards Murong Ditian. Even Murong Ditian's expression stiffened. No matter how strong his cultivation was, he couldn't withstand the fury of so many people. However, although that branch had been shattered, the 5 Tao Comprehension Leaves were still intact. They were glowing with green light as they used the surging air to scatter in all directions. Snatch! At this moment, this was the only word left in everyone's hearts. Yi Guqin used the Book of Change's 64 hexagrams as his figure blurred like smoke. He directly reached out and grabbed a green Tao Comprehension Leaf. Su Jianchu's slender waist twisted gracefully as she also obtained a Tao Comprehension Leaf. On the other side, Xia Yubing's slender fingers continuously pointed, and several prodigies who wanted to fight for the Tao Comprehension Leaves were frozen into ice sculptures. She pinched her fingers lightly and collected a leaf. On the other side, Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji also wanted to fight for a Tao Comprehension Leaf, but they were forced back by Shintu Miao's ferocious saber light. Shintu Miao also obtained a Tao Comprehension Leaf. In the blink of an eye, only one Tao Comprehension Leaf remained. Murong Ditian used the mysterious Heaven Sword art, and his sword light split apart, forcing many prodigies back. He reached out and was about to grab a Tao Comprehension Leaf. However, at this moment, a pitch-black sword light silently swept through the air. Murong Ditian's hair stood on end as he sensed a fatal danger. He took out the Mara sword, and the sword light slashed through the air as it collided with the pitch-black sword light. However, there wasn't the slightest sound of an explosion. The sword light that Murong Ditian released seemed to have been silently devoured by the pitch-black sword light. Whoosh! A pitch-black figure flew over at an extremely fast speed and reached out to grab the last Tao Comprehension Leaf. You! After seeing who it was, Murong Ditian's expression became very ugly. The one who had snatched the last Dao comprehension leaf was none other than Yuan Mie. Even Murong Ditian, who had unsealed the Mara sword, didn't have the confidence to deal with Yuan Mie, who possessed the dark sword intent. Right now, Murong Ditian didn't obtain the infant soul fruit or the Dao comprehension leaf. This made him almost want to vomit blood. It was like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Yuan Mie coldly glanced at Murong Ditian. Murong Ditian's expression became cold as he coldly snorted. The spirit herbs in the medicine field were almost all harvested. Seeing that there were no more opportunities here, the prodigies continued to rush into the depths of the cave. Let's go. Yi Guqin spoke. His harvest was rather plentiful. Just the infant soul fruit and the Dao comprehension leaf were extremely valuable. Yi Guqin's group, Xia Yubing's group, and Yuan Mie's group all continued to go deeper. The deeper they went, the stronger the aura of a supremacy faintly emitted. Of course, the risk was also greater. From time to time, prodigies would accidentally touch the formations. There were many ferocious killing formations that were impossible to guard against. They could instantly kill a prodigy. Be careful. Su Jianshi took a step forward. There was a faint flash of light under her feet. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He directly pulled Su Jianshi over. A vigorous sword light suddenly erupted from the ground. It was enough to instantly kill a peak stage Qi refinement martial artist. Su Jianshi's delicate body crashed into Yi Guqin's embrace due to inertia. Her face was flushed red. There are many dangers here. It's best to be careful. Yi Guqin's gaze also paused on the beautiful woman in his arms, whose face was as beautiful as peach blossoms for a moment. Su Jianshi quietly raised her head. Her gaze collided with Yi Guqin's as her heart raced. Right at this moment, a prodigy's miserable howl suddenly came from not far away. An extremely grand sword formation was activated. It erupted with boundless sword qi. That's... Yi Guqin turned his head and looked over. He could vaguely see a cave within the boundless sword formation. There were countless sword marks in the cave. They were densely packed and disorderly. Could this be the place where that supremacy practiced his sword? Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. If that Heaven Palace realm supremacy was really a sword cultivator, then his sword technique must be extraordinary. If one could comprehend it, the benefits would be immeasurable. Chapter 190. Most sword experts had a place they were used to practicing their swordsmanship. It could be on a cliff, in front of a sword-testing rock, or in the depths of a forest. Some sword cultivators with truly profound cultivation would leave behind sword marks that contained Taoist rhymes. Some sword cultivators even used sword marks as a legacy and integrated their own sword arts into it, leaving it for talented juniors to comprehend. Under the cover of the Infinity Sword formation, there seemed to be sword qi buzzing in the cave. The stone walls of the cave were also densely covered with countless sword marks. To a sword cultivator, this was a rare opportunity and comprehension. But for martial artists who were not sword cultivators, it did not have that much attraction. Let's go somewhere else. The opportunities in this sword cavern are of no use to us. Moreover, only sword cultivators have the chance to enter that sword array. Some of the geniuses shook their heads in disappointment. However, the Venerable Realm's cave was extremely vast, and the opportunities definitely weren't limited to this one. Therefore, these prodigies weren't too disappointed and directly went to other places. Young Master Dugu will also go and look for other opportunities, Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji said. One of them used a zither, while the other used a saber. The opportunities here were useless to them. Be careful. Yi Guqin nodded lightly. On the other side, Prince Yuani, Shintu Miao, and the others also left to look for other opportunities. Now, only Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, Xia Yubing, Yuan Mie, and Murong Ditian remained outside the sword cavern. The situation suddenly became strange. Venerable Realm's sword cavern. Yuan Mie's single eye fluctuated. He was the first to make a move. As his figure flashed, he seemed to transform into a pitch-black sword and plunged into the infinity sword formation. Let's go. Whether it was Xia Yubing or Yi Guqin and the others, they didn't want others to beat them to it. Therefore, almost at the same time as Yuan Mie plunged out, they also flashed into the infinity sword formation. As soon as he entered the sword formation, Yi Guqin felt the surrounding sword qi rushing towards him. Yi Guqin held the fallen star soft sword in his hand. His sword will of hardness and softness spread out, using softness to overcome hardness. When those surging sword qis landed in front of Yi Guqin, they were all deflected by Yi Guqin's soft sword. They were deflected to the left and right, unable to cause too much damage to Yi Guqin. Of course, this was because Yi Guqin possessed hard and soft sword insight, and that was why he was able to use such a trick. Elemental annihilation was like a sword of the underworld, emitting boundless black sword light as it broke through the formation. Xia Yubing also used the ice sword intent. The surrounding sword qi froze, unable to approach her. As for Su Jianshi, she had the enlightened sword heart and had an extraordinary understanding of sword formations. She quickly found a safe way to break the formation. She twisted her waist and quickly flew towards the sword cavern. As for Murong Ditian, he used the Mara sword to protect himself and forcefully charged through. Although he suffered from the attacks of numerous sword qis, with a top-grade spirit rune divine weapon protecting him, he was still able to persevere. For non-sword cultivators, such an infinity sword formation would be extremely difficult to break through, and it would be extremely dangerous. However, it wasn't a killing formation for Yi Guqin and the other sword geniuses. Finally, they all passed through the infinity sword formation. As soon as they entered the sword cavern, Yi Guqin felt the surrounding sword-based Taoist rhymes. This was a place for Sky Palace realm sovereigns to practice their swords. To sword cultivators, this was an absolute opportunity that could only be encountered by chance. Especially Su Jianshi, who possessed the enlightened sword heart. At this moment, her beautiful face froze. Her eyes seemed to be filled with doubt and enlightenment. It was as if she was listening to some almighty preaching. In this sword cavern, anyone who casually attacks will be my enemy, Elemental Annihilation said with a hoarse voice. It was obvious that such an opportunity couldn't be wasted. If someone were to fight here, it would definitely disturb the aura of this place. At that time, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. How can such an opportunity be wasted? Xia Yubing smiled faintly and chose to sit cross-legged in front of a stone wall. Elemental Annihilation and Murong Ditian did the same. Su Jianshi, on the other hand, seemed to be in a daze as she stared at the sword marks on the stone wall. The sword marks of a sovereign were absolute treasures to those with the enlightened sword heart. It's a pity that I haven't reached the enlightened sword heart yet. Yi Guqin was slightly regretful, but he wasn't disappointed. Although he hadn't reached the enlightened sword heart, he had already condensed the seed of the sword heart. In addition to his talent as a sword devil, his comprehension ability wasn't much worse than Su Jianshi's. Yi Guqin wasn't in a hurry to sit down. Instead, he scanned the surroundings of the sword cavern. The sword marks on the stone wall were a mess. It was obvious that they were formed by many complicated sword arts. If one's talent in the sword Dao wasn't enough, they would only see countless chaotic sword moves and wouldn't be able to piece together a complete sword art. Among these sword marks, there are the most ordinary sword arts, Xiantian sword arts, spirit sword arts, and even king sword arts. Yi Guqin's eyes shone with a strange light. It seemed that this sovereign sword cultivator was also someone with extraordinary vision. He didn't blindly ask for the best sword arts. Even ordinary Xiantian sword arts could be comprehended from the sword cavern. This was the vision of a sovereign sword cultivator. Yi Guqin had already comprehended this level. Low-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend ordinary sword arts from the stone wall. Mid-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend Xiantian sword arts. High-grade sword cultivators might be able to comprehend spirit sword arts. Only the most talented sword cultivators can obtain the few king-level sword techniques on the sword cavern's stone walls. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. This was a great opportunity for him. He swept his gaze across the stone wall and suddenly discovered a few familiar sword marks. That familiar destructive power made Yi Guqin's eyes light up with surprise. How could there be such a coincidence? The god-slaying sword art. Yi Guqin suppressed the surprise in his heart and sat cross-legged on the ground to comprehend it. The god-slaying sword art he obtained was only an incomplete version, but it was already comparable to a spirit sword art. If it was the complete god-slaying sword art, how powerful would it be? Yi Guqin had always wanted to obtain it, but he didn't expect to obtain it without any effort. However, it's already extremely difficult to extract the trajectory of the god-slaying sword art's sword marks from these thousands of sword marks, let alone comprehend the complete god-slaying sword art, Yi Guqin thought to himself. While thinking, he suddenly took out the leaf of enlightenment that he had obtained previously. After hesitating for a moment, he put it in his mouth. As soon as the leaf of enlightenment entered his mouth, Yi Guqin felt saliva in his mouth and teeth, and his mind instantly became extremely clear. It was as if a dusty mirror had been polished by a piece of white cloth. As expected of a top-grade divine medicine. Just a leaf has such an effect. Yi Guqin was delighted. His mind was extremely clear and his thoughts were instantly clear. He already had extremely high talent in the sword Dao, and now with the help of the leaf of enlightenment, his comprehension reached a terrifying level. The originally chaotic sword marks in Yi Guqin's mind instantly reduced and became clear. In the end, only the sword moves of the god-slaying sword art were left. Then, Yi Guqin sank into comprehension. As if they had been enlightened by Yi Guqin, the others also took out the leaf of enlightenment and put it in their mouths to comprehend the stone wall. Only Murong Ditian's expression was somewhat ugly. Among the 5 people present, only he didn't have the leaf of enlightenment. Therefore, he would be at a disadvantage in comprehending the sword moves. Chapter 191. Time passed silently in the sword cavern. Because the sword cavern was protected by the infinite sword formation, no random person could enter. In such a silent atmosphere, Yi Guqin and the other 4 people also stared at the stone wall, trying to comprehend the strongest swordsmanship from it. Yi Guqin had already cultivated the first 3 moves of the god-slaying sword technique, so it was easy for him to comprehend them. In addition to his talent and the epiphany leaf, Yi Guqin's understanding of the god-slaying sword technique became deeper and deeper. It was as if an illusory figure was practicing the god-slaying sword technique in his mind. The first move, Blood Massacre, the second move, Demon Only, the third move, Underworld. At this point, the illusory figure in his mind seemed to be stuck. However, Yi Guqin looked at the sword mark on the stone wall and visualized the evolution of the sword technique. The figure in his mind moved again. The fourth move, 3 Roads. There was a river in the underworld called the 3 Roads River. The power of this move was even more terrifying than that of the underworld. However, the illusory figure in his mind did not stop his sword technique. Then, the 5th move was revealed. Then, the 6th move. The complete version of the god-slaying sword technique had a total of 6 moves. Yi Guqin's eyes shone with unprecedented excitement. This was a great opportunity. The complete version of the god-slaying sword technique, the 4th move, 3 Roads, was already comparable to a top-tier spiritual level sword technique. As for the 5th and 6th moves, they had already reached the power of a king-level sword technique. Yi Guqin had obtained his first king-level sword technique. Moreover, it was a king-level sword technique that focused on killing. Once it was used, its lethality would be shocking. Entering this venerable one's cave is indeed a great opportunity. Yi Guqin's breathing quickened. Although a spiritual level sword technique was powerful, it was like a natural chasm compared to a king-level sword technique. The power was incomparable. Moreover, with the foundation of the first 3 moves, Yi Guqin would be able to practice the king-level god-slaying sword technique more easily. Just as Yiguchin's emotions were fluctuating, he also realized that the epiphany leaf in his mouth seemed to have melted and was gradually dissipating. Sadly, it is only a leaf of the tree of enlightenment. If I could acquire an entire tree of enlightenment, then I would have an endless supply of leaves. Yiguchin shook his head and threw this greedy thought to the back of his head. After obtaining the god-slaying sword technique, Yiguchin did not stop visualizing, but continued to comprehend. Although the enlightenment leaf had dissipated, a portion of its essence had permanently merged with Yiguchin's consciousness, increasing his comprehension by a little. In Yiguchin's mind, the illusory figure began to practice the sword again. In addition to the god-slaying sword technique, the boundless heaven sword technique, the void sword technique, the shadow-killing sword technique, the tai chi sword technique, etc. However, as time passed, the illusory figure in his mind gradually faded away. Only when Yiguchin had truly comprehended the heart integrated into sword would he be able to form a permanent illusory figure in his mind and carry out sword deduction. On the other side, Murong Ditien and the others gradually woke up. Murong Ditien's expression was unsightly. He had comprehended a spirit-level sword technique. Afterwards, Xia Yubing and Yuan Mia opened their eyes at the same time. An incomplete king-level sword technique. Xia Yubing muttered in her heart, seemingly dissatisfied. Yuan Mia's eyes also had a trace of unwillingness as he muttered, "I will come here again." What he had comprehended was also an incomplete king-level sword technique. An incomplete king-level sword technique's power was at most equivalent to a supreme spirit-level sword technique. Finally, it was Su Jianshi. She had also spent the most time, but at this moment, she also opened her bright eyes. The surprise that flashed through her eyes clearly did not escape Yiguchin's eyes. However, Su Jianshi was very smart. She did not reveal too much, nor did she say what she had comprehended. Instead, she winked at Yiguchin. "Let's go. We've already spent too much time here." Yiguchin waved his hand. Not only had he obtained a complete king-level sword technique, but he had also made progress in the boundless heaven sword technique and other spirit-level sword techniques. He had broken through his bottleneck. The harvest this time was bountiful. Afterwards, the 5 of them left the sword cavern. After leaving the sword cavern, Su Jianshi whispered to Yiguchin. She had indeed comprehended a king-level sword technique. Yiguchin was not surprised. With the sword heart illumination and the enlightenment leaf, it would be strange if she could not comprehend a king-level sword technique. Young Master Dugu seems to have gained a lot this time. Not far away, Xia Yubing's gaze swept over. Testing me? Yiguchin thought in his heart. However, he shook his head indifferently and said, "Just some gains." He naturally could not reveal that he had comprehended a complete king-level sword technique. This was also one of his trump cards. Yiguchin and Xia Yubing were both on guard as they rushed into the depths of the cavern at the same time. It had to be said that there were many fortuitous opportunities in the venerable cavern. The deeper they went, the more Yiguchin saw a spirit liquid pool formed by spirit liquid. Spirit crystal herb field, sword cavern, and spirit liquid pool. These were only a small part of the fortuitous opportunities in the venerable cavern. No wonder the 7 major factions value this venerable cavern so much. If I can obtain a venerable cavern, it would be equivalent to obtaining a precious place to nurture my sect's disciples, Yiguchin thought to himself. He had also obtained some spirit liquid to use in the future when he broke through. However, Yiguchin knew that although the herb field, sword cavern, and spirit liquid pool were all precious places, the venerable cavern was not simple. However, the opportunities in the venerable one's cave abode were obviously not that simple. It was only because they had not stepped into the true depths of the cave abode. The true foundation of a venerable cavern was far beyond what chi refinement realm cultivators like them could imagine. In front is. The group of geniuses, including Yiguchin, once again walked into the depths of the cavern. Suddenly, a blood-red door appeared in front of them. It was placed horizontally at the entrance of the passageway, blocking their way. It seems that behind that blood-red door is the true foundation of a venerable cavern. Yiguchen vaguely sensed something. The group of geniuses was somewhat hesitant. After all, no one knew what was behind that blood-red door. Just as Yiguchen was staring at the blood-red door, the golden core in his origin ring with the 5 mythical beasts imprinted on it suddenly trembled slightly. This golden core. Yiguchen was puzzled. Yiguchen had found this 5-colored golden core and the 5 mythical beasts' ancient jade in the bottomless demon abyss. At this moment, the trembling of the golden core confused Yiguchen. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. The venerable cavern is right in front of us. Finally, one of the geniuses could not resist the greed in his heart. He directly rushed to the blood-red door, pressed his hands on it, and began to push. The 5-colored golden core in Yiguchen's origin ring trembled even more violently. This trembling gave Yiguchen an extreme sense of uneasiness. At the same time, as the blood-red door opened, a faint murderous aura spread out. Let's go. Yiguchen patted Su Jianchu's shoulder. Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji, who had gathered with them, also looked at Yiguchen. Let's go. Yiguchen and the others hurriedly retreated. At the same time, Xia Yubing's side also abruptly retreated. The blood-red door was finally pushed open by that genius. The moment the door opened, a ferocious and enormous black shadow directly swallowed that genius. Chapter 192. Although that genius wasn't as strong as Xia Yubing, Yiguchen, and the others, he was still a genius who had reached the 8th cycle of qi refinement. However, he was swallowed by the black shadow without even having the chance to react. When the black shadow slowly revealed itself, the faces of all the geniuses turned pale and their lips trembled. This black shadow was shockingly a python-like demonic beast. Its entire body was covered in pitch-black scales that seemed to be cast from gold and iron. Its python head was incomparably ferocious. What was even more shocking was that there seemed to be 2 black horns protruding from its head. That's a 5th-grade black dragon python. Some of the geniuses cried out in shock. A 5th-grade monster was comparable to a hidden gate of life and death. Yiguchen's pupils suddenly shrank. From the pressure and evil aura emanating from the black dragon python, he could tell that it had reached the peak of the 5th grade. This black dragon python is even stronger than the heavenly fire golden eyes beast that Jun Xiaoyao fought before. Yiguchen quickly retreated. A 5th-grade monster like the heavenly fire golden eyes beast was comparable to a hidden gate of life and death. However, a 5th-grade monster like the black dragon python was comparable to a spiritual bridge of life and death. It was invincible. Yiguchen was very decisive. He knew that the venerable cavern was definitely not that simple. They couldn't go any further and could only retreat. Yiguchen, Xia Yubing, and the others were the first to retreat, so they were also the furthest away from the black dragon python. The black dragon python, on the other hand, was filled with evil aura and was extremely ferocious. Its bloody mouth could easily swallow a genius. The various martial arts techniques of the geniuses couldn't cause any real damage to the black dragon python. Looking at the one-sided slaughter, Yiguchen sighed slightly. At the same time, the 5-colored golden core in his vital ring trembled even more violently with the appearance of the black dragon python. What does the 5-colored golden core have to do with the black dragon python? Or does the black dragon python have some effect on the 5-colored golden core? Yiguchen was puzzled. However, he couldn't verify anything right now, let alone attack the black dragon python. The black dragon python should have a trace of atavistic dragon blood in its body. This 5-colored golden core also has the azure dragon totem. This is the only connection between them. However, this matter should be left for the future. This was the only thing Yiguchen could think of. The black dragon python continued to pursue them from behind. Yiguchen and the others used their extreme speed to quickly leave the cave. Finally, they emerged from the pitch-black underground cave and arrived at the center of the stone forest. Hiss! As soon as the incomparably thick black dragon python emerged from the underground cave, the inscriptions on the surface of the surrounding 9 stone pillars flickered, as if some kind of sealing array had been activated. The black dragon python's body was instantly trapped, and it could only let out an unwilling roar that shook the sky. The roar caused the faces of the sky prides who had barely managed to escape to turn pale, and fear lingered in their hearts. Many martial artists had entered the ancient stone forest, but less than 1/10 of them had managed to escape. Most of them had been killed by the spirit-siphoning bugs, the cave's array, and the black dragon python. Moreover, they had not truly obtained the opportunity of the cave. Everyone knew that the real opportunity of this venerable cave was most likely behind the blood-colored door guarded by the black dragon python. Unfortunately, with this peak rank 5 demonic beast guarding it, they would definitely not be able to break through with their chi refinement realm strength. This was also the reason why the 7 superpowers were able to safely allow them to enter first to obtain the opportunity. Let's leave this stone forest first. Yiguchen waved his hand. With the black dragon python's presence, it was impossible for them to enter the cave again. The only thing they could do now was to leave the stone forest first and then seize the ownership of this cave. Is this finally the moment? Yiguchen muttered in his heart. The remaining sky prides all left this place and walked out of the ancient stone forest. Outside the stone forest, the 7 superpowers and a large number of martial artists were all waiting quietly. They all knew that the Venerable One's cave abode was the final destination of the elite meeting. Whoever could truly obtain this cave would be the most eye-catching existence in this elite meeting. Oh, they're out. Some of the spectating martial artists also saw a few sparse figures walking out of the stone forest. There are only so few people left. Many of the martial artists were shocked. Greed is not enough, Xian Tai sneered from the Limitless Sword Sect's camp. It could be said that he was determined to obtain this venerable cave. At the same time, Xian Tai also knew that most of the people who entered to obtain the opportunity did not have the chance to come out alive. As time passed, a small number of people, including Yiguchen, walked out of the stone forest. Seeing Yiguchen walk out unscathed, Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts' faces darkened. They had hoped that Yiguchen would die in the venerable cave. That way, they would not have to do anything. Unfortunately, the situation did not develop as they had expected. Sensing the murderous gazes of the 3 experts, Yiguchen's expression remained calm. As long as he obtained this venerable cave, all life and death crises would be easily resolved. As all the remaining geniuses came out, the entire place fell into an eerie silence. In this silence, only the sound of sand whistling could be heard. Whether it was the 7 superpowers or the tens of thousands of spectating martial artists, they all held their breaths. Because they knew that the following battle would be the most tragic. The remaining prodigies would fight for the final rights to this venerable cave. Now it's interesting. Xian Tai lowered his head and looked down. Qingqi, who do you think will be the final winner of this elite meeting? Elder Qinghe asked. This. According to strength, the most likely winners should be Xia Yubing, Yuan Mia, and Shinta Miao. However, Dugu Wubai has the battle record of killing Qi Naoshi. He is also a strong dark horse. Chu Qingqi hesitated. However, he also sighed. It was a pity that Yiguchen did not come. Xia Shishir and Xia Ying, of the Xia family, were among the spectating crowd. There will only be one biggest winner of this elite meeting, and that's Sister Yubing. Xia Ying's gaze was fanatical as she stared at Xia Yubing. In her heart, Xia Yubing was an unparalleled genius. On the other hand, Xia Shishir's gaze quietly fell on Yiguchen's figure. Xia Shishir felt an indescribable sense of familiarity towards the young man who had saved her. On the other side, Princess Yuanyang was also among the spectating crowd. She did not pass the 3rd stage, so she did not have the qualifications to participate in the 4th stage. Yiguchen. You really didn't come. If that incident hadn't happened in the Sword King's secret realm back then, perhaps the one who shines in this elite meeting would not be Xia Yubing, but your sword sect's Yiguchen. Princess Yuanyang shook her head. There was a hint of disappointment in her eyes and bitterness at the corner of her mouth. The figure she was infatuated with did not even have the courage to participate in the elite meeting. Big brother, you must win. In the crowd, the petite Shui clenched her small hands in front of her chest as if she was praying. At this moment, everyone had different thoughts in their hearts. However, the only thing they had in common was that they were all looking forward to the real final battle. Chapter 193. Outside the ancient stone forest, strong winds swept up the yellow sand, whistling endlessly. Although there were tens of thousands of people in the surroundings, there wasn't the slightest bit of noise. Instead, it was extremely quiet. It was so quiet that it seemed as if they were waiting for something. Outside the stone forest, neither Xia Yubing nor Yiguchen moved. She's really patient. Yiguchen glanced at Xia Yubing from the corner of his eye. Xia Yubing was a very shrewd person. He didn't believe that she wasn't prepared, nor did he believe that she didn't have any trump cards. However, although Xia Yubing was unfathomable, Yiguchen wasn't a pushover either. As if sensing the heavy atmosphere, Chu Shiqing, Song Daozhen, and the other Heaven's Prides exchanged a glance before leaving with a bitter smile. They directly gave up on fighting for the venerable cave dwelling. They knew that with their strength, trying to take the cave dwelling was no different from a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Rather than being beaten back by others, it was better for them to retreat first. There were quite a few Heaven's Prides who had such thoughts, but there were also quite a few who wanted to fight with their lives on the line. There are quite a few people who aren't afraid of death. Shintu Miao rested the terrifying saber on his shoulder as he scanned the surroundings and shook his head with a cold smile. In such a situation, those who didn't retreat had the mentality to fight with their lives on the line. After all, apart from the Sword Sect Tower Forest where wind-sweeping building was, the other 6 factions had all thrown out tempting chips. It could be said that whoever obtained the venerable cave dwelling would ascend to the heavens in a single bound and become the most dazzling existence in the entire Saint Origin Empire. Their future would also be limitlessly bright. There were quite a few Heaven's Prides who were willing to risk their lives for a future. I want this cave dwelling. Whoever wants to fight, feel free to come. Yuan Mie stepped forward with a blood-stained sword in his hand as he scanned the surroundings with his deathly still eyes. TSK, as expected of the second on the Heaven's Pride list. How bold. Yuan Mie is a rare sword's Heaven's Pride. Like Xia Yubing, he has comprehended sword intent. He is one of the most likely candidates to obtain the venerable cave dwelling. Regardless of whether it was the spectators or the 7 forces, they all began to whisper to each other. However, no one thought that Yuan Mie was overestimating himself. His strength was indeed worthy of his current cold arrogance. Yuan Mie, how dare a bastard like you talk nonsense here? Prince Yuanyi stood out and said in a cold tone. How could he sit back and watch Yuan Mie obtain this venerable immortal abode? If he really got it, he would be completely left behind by Yuan Mie. Therefore, Prince Yuanyi could not let Yuan Mie get the cave abode no matter what. Although I can't kill you due to orders, it shouldn't be a problem to teach you a lesson. Yuan Mie's eyes were cold. His figure suddenly disappeared and appeared in front of Prince Yuan Yi in an instant. Prince Yuanyi's expression changed as he hurriedly took out the heavenly sacred 5 elements wheel. This was like a fuse, completely igniting the quiet atmosphere. This supremacy's cave abode is mine. One of the Sky Prides suddenly attacked the Sky Prides beside him with bloodshot eyes. If I can get my hands on this cavern, I'll have a meteoric rise, and I'll be able to choose any of the 7 great powers. Kill. I'll fight to the death and come back from the jaws of death. I'll obtain the greatest opportunity. The whole situation was like a bomb that completely detonated. Boom. 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 Countless streams of true qi intertwined violently, scattering the wind and sand in the sky. That kind of crazy attack caused the spectators to be speechless, and they were secretly shocked in their hearts. Let's get into formation. The upper echelons of the 7 great powers acted almost at the same time. Powerful surging true qi overflowed and intertwined with each other, forming a giant true qi shield that covered a large area outside the stone forest. It became the battlefield for these sky prides to fight, and at the same time, prevent the true qi from spreading and attacking the crowd. Within the true qi shield, the sky prides fought wildly and fiercely. Even if they died in such a bloody battle, the forces behind them could not complain because they were willing to do so. Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing, who were outside the true qi shield, stared at Yiguchen's figure. After Yiguchen saved their lives, they had a guess in their hearts, but they could not confirm it. The reason for that was because they felt that this was too absurd and unreal. Dugu Wubai, who are you? Chu Shiqing's eyes flashed with a strange light as she muttered to herself. Yiguchen was still standing calmly within the protective shield of his vital energy. He was watching the elites fighting each other. Silly boy, what should we do? Su Jianshi asked. She didn't have any thoughts about the venerable cave. As for Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji, they also had an accurate understanding of their own strength. With their strength, they couldn't obtain the cave, so they tactfully didn't make a move. Wait a bit. She hasn't made a move yet. Yiguchen narrowed his eyes and looked at Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's expression was as calm as a virgin's. In the midst of the fierce battle, she was like a snow lotus that stood aloof from the world. If he didn't have his previous experience, just by looking at Xia Yubing, she was indeed an otherworldly beauty. However, only Yiguchen, who knew the truth, understood how cold and dark her heart was under such a beautiful appearance. Xia Yubing, I'm going to tear off your mask. Yiguchen's gaze was extremely sharp. That Murong Ditian was actually injured. Suddenly, cries of surprise rang out from the crowd of spectators. Murong Ditian, who possessed the Mara sword, was definitely one of the strongest opponents. However, at this moment, a grey-robed man was attacking him without fear of death. Damn it! Who are you? I have no enmity with you, but you actually attacked me so ruthlessly. Murong Ditian's expression was unsightly as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He was also caught off guard by this grey-robed man's sneak attack and suffered heavy injuries. However, the grey-robed man didn't say a word. Instead, his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. The grey-robed man slowly raised his hand, and a terrifying sword chi soared into the sky. This is the killing move of a spirit-grade sword art. Murong Ditian's mouth twitched as he tightly gripped the Mara sword in his hand. He originally thought that his opponent would be Xia Yubing, Dugu Wubai and the others. However, he didn't expect that he would be in such a sorry state against a grey-robed man. Mysterious Heaven Sword Art, sword shaking the universe. Murong Ditian also used the killing move of the Mysterious Heaven Sword Art and collided with the grey-robed man. Ferocious sword chi spread out in all directions, causing the surrounding sky prides to spit out blood as they were sent flying. That grey-robed man is actually so powerful. I have never heard of his name before. The grey-robed man seems to be called Hong Chen Shui. He didn't reveal his strength in the previous rounds, and only now did he reveal his full strength. However, why do I feel that every move of hers is a killing move? What kind of deep hatred does she have with that Murong Ditian? The spectators were all whispering to each other. Obviously, they were very curious about Hong Chen Shui who had suddenly attacked. Yiguchen's gaze turned towards the grey-robed man as he frowned slightly. He had a vague feeling in his heart, but he couldn't explain it clearly. Chapter 194. Just as the battle between the geniuses reached its climax, Xia Yubing, who had been silent all this while, finally made a move. She took light steps and slowly stepped forward. With every step she took, the sword intent in her body would spread a little. In the end, a terrifying sword intent soared into the sky, as if it was going to sweep in all directions. As the sword intent spread, the surrounding temperature rapidly dropped, and snowflakes began to fall from the sky. This was simply inconceivable. The heavenly wasteland plains was a place where gales howled all year round, and yellow sand filled the sky. Yet, at this moment, snowflakes were falling. Although it was only limited to a small region outside the stone forest, it was enough to make people speechless and feel astonished. Xia Yubing walked out in the wind and snow just like that, like an ice goddess, and had an awe-inspiring temperament. The snowflakes fluttering in the air also caused the many heavens' prides who were fighting to stop. Their gazes all turned towards Xia Yubing in shock. Even Murong Ditian, Hongchen Shui, Shintu Miao, Prince Yuani, Yuan Mie, and other top-notch geniuses temporarily stopped, and looked at Xia Yubing with extremely serious gazes. Everyone, it's already meaningless to continue fighting because this abode will be obtained by Yubing. Xia Yubing spoke with a voice that was cold like ice. Xia Yubing, although you're a genius, you can't be so domineering, a genius said indignantly. Oh, is that so? Looks like Yubing hasn't displayed enough strength and skills. Xia Yubing shook her head indifferently. Just as that genius wanted to say something, his body suddenly froze, and the snowflakes that fell on him directly turned into rays of sword qi, piercing into his body. With a plop, that genius directly fell to the ground, dead. Such a method made the hearts of many spectators go cold, and their backs go numb. Could it be that she's already taken that step? Even Yuan Mie, who was always serious, had his pupils shrink at this moment. Because only he, who had also comprehended sword intent, understood what it meant. Xia Yubing's comprehension of the sword intent of ice had almost reached the extreme, which was why she had such a shocking method. At this moment, the world was silent. Snowflakes fluttered, making Xia Yubing look like a fairy exiled from a snowy mountain. The gazes of the 7 great forces and tens of thousands of cultivators all landed on her. At this moment, Xia Yubing was the most eye-catching existence in this world. Finally, we've reached this step. Although Xia Yubing's expression was calm, great waves were surging in her heart. She had finally succeeded in realizing her ambition, becoming the most dazzling existence in this world and even the entire Saint Origin dynasty. Today, Yubing will be bold once again. Not only will I inherit the Venerable One's abode, I will also inherit the name of the sword sect. Xia Yubing said with a clear and cold voice. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even some of the higher-ups of the 7 great powers had never imagined that Xia Yubing would actually possess such ambition. Not only did she intend to seize an exalt abode, she even intended to seize Yiguchen's title of sword master. Many martial artists were also in an uproar as they discussed animatedly. However, Xia Yubing's methods from before still greatly intimidated them. Adding on the fact that the rumored sword sect Yiguchen had never appeared, the majority of the people still leaned towards Xia Yubing. That's right, we support Miss Xia to inherit the title of sword master. That Yiguchen, he's not worthy. Someone shouted from the crowd. No one knew that he was a disciple of the Xia family. That's right, Yiguchen is just a coward. Even now, the elite meeting has ended and he still hasn't appeared. He's afraid of Miss Xia. What qualifications does a dog-shit genius like him have to be called sword master? Miss Xia will be the new sword master. In the beginning, there were only a few people shouting. However, in the end, it almost became a wave of voices that covered the sky and covered the earth as they shouted Xia Yubing's name. Xia Yubing's lips curled into a faint smile. This was the effect she wanted. Ever since the elite meeting had proposed to remove the title of sword master, Xia Yubing had been building momentum for herself. Her strong performance along the way, as well as suppressing the other geniuses, were all for her own sake. In the end, with the cooperation of the chess pieces she had arranged to guide the public opinion, she successfully became the successor of Sword Master. It had to be said that from every angle, Xia Yubing's plan could be said to be perfect. However, Yiguchen had never appeared. This was the reason why Xia Yubing dared to carry out this plan. This little girl's schemes are a bit deep. Sword Sect Pagoda Forest's elder Qing he shook his head. He didn't like this kind of shrewd genius. Brother Yi, sigh. Chu Qingqi shook his head, slightly disappointed. It seems that the title of Sword Master will be inherited by Xia Yubing. Xian Tai was considering how to take Xia Yubing into the Limitless Sword sect. As if seeing that the situation had been decided, the smile on Xia Yubing's lips could no longer be suppressed. After waiting for so long, this day has finally come. Yi Guqin, I'm no longer that weak girl who would only follow behind you and stand in the shadow of your light. I will inherit everything you have. Let me replace you, to shine with endless brilliance. Xia Yubing muttered in her heart. Her aura erupted uncontrollably. This aura wasn't just made up of true qi, but also contained traces of soul power. This pressure. Half-step divine soul. The surrounding geniuses looked at Xia Yubing in disbelief. Even geniuses like Yuan Mia and Shintu Mia were only at the peak of the 9th cycle of qi refining. As for Xia Yubing, she had been hiding her aura all this time, but she had already reached half-step divine soul. Xia Yubing hid her strength so deeply. Su Jianshi and the others were shocked. When Xia Yubing truly revealed the strength of a half-step divine soul, all of the geniuses present were intimidated. The crowd cheered even louder for Xia Yubing becoming the new sword master. It seems that this gathering is over. The final victor is indeed Xia Yubing, muttered Xian Tai. The people from the 7 factions all believed that the dust had settled and that there was no need to compete anymore. Xia Yubing's aura, cultivation, and every other aspect had suppressed everyone present. There was no doubt that she would be the final victor. Damn it, why did this woman have to win in the end? There's also that sword master Yi Guqin. I've always thought of him as a worthy opponent, but he didn't even appear. This is infuriating. Su Jianshi puffed up her cheeks and stomped her feet in resentment. Then do you want him to appear? The youth beside Su Jianshi, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Silly boy, what do you mean? Su Jianshi was a little confused. She looked at Yi Guqin in confusion. It's time, said Yi Guqin with a smile. He patted Su Jianshi's shoulder and slowly stepped forward. At this moment, Su Jianshi, Zither Fairy, and Bai Yanji were all surprised by Yi Guqin's actions. Thank you for not abandoning me. Since that's the case, Yubing will officially take over the title of Sword Master and become. Xia Yubing's voice was cold as it spread in all directions. However, before she could finish speaking, a cold shout resounded through the heavens and earth. Are you worthy of the title of Sword Master? This cold shout was like the edge of a sword that fiercely cut through the clamor between the heavens and earth. For a moment, it was as if all the voices had been cut off. Everyone's gazes uniformly landed on the black-robed youth who was slowly walking out. Dugu Wubai, what qualifications do you have to say such words? Xia Yubing coldly rebuked. She frowned in annoyance. In her eyes, although Dugu Wubai was a threat, she was a half-step divine soul cultivator. She might be able to suppress him. Oh, if Dugu Wubai's identity isn't enough, then what about this identity? Yi Guqin revealed a cold smile. He slowly raised his hand, placed it against his chin, and slowly tore off the disguise mask. As the mask fell off, his ordinary face disappeared. What replaced it was a cold and arrogant face with sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. At the same time, he took out his iconic Tribulation Dust Sword. He slowly raised the sword and pointed its tip at Xia Yubing. I am the Sword Master. Who dares to challenge me? Chapter 195. I am the Sword Sect, who dares to challenge me? When Yi Guqin uttered these words, the already quiet atmosphere became even more deathly still, to the point of suffocation. Among the tens of thousands of spectators, there were quite a few who supported Xia Yubing. However, at this moment, those clamors and shouts seemed to be stuck in their throats. Every single cultivator's face was flushed red, and their eyes were wide open. They felt as if they were hallucinating as they stared at the youth who had removed his mask. This person is. Some people's teeth were even trembling. That familiar yet unfamiliar face made everyone feel as if they were in a dream. Dugu Wubai, is the sword's sex Yi Guqin? Someone let out a cry of disbelief, incomparably shocked. Whoosh, a tidal wave of uproar surged out like a surging tide. Not to mention the tens of thousands of spectators, even the people from the 7 major factions had stunned expressions on their faces. All along, Xia Yubing had belittled, looked down upon, and viewed as a coward by everyone. Not only had the sword sex Yi Guqin come, he had even transformed into the Dugu Wubai right before their eyes. In the first round, he had shocked everyone with his talent, becoming a potential dark horse. In the second round, he had unleashed his sword in a rage for a beauty, killing Qin Batian and the other 2 geniuses. In the third round, he had defeated Lu Tianying, and even lasted 15 minutes against the Sun Moon Hall's Divine Soul Realm genius, Xianing. In the fourth round, he had defeated the Bloody Battle Spear Monarch, Qin Aoshi, in a domineering manner. Such battle results had never appeared in the history of the Elite Association. Therefore, this made everyone pay close attention to the sudden appearance of the dark horse, Dugu Wubai. They even believed that he was not inferior to Yuan Mia, Shintu Miao, Xia Yubing, and the others, and was a true peak genius. But now, the Dugu Wubai that made everyone feel incomparably shocked was actually the coward Yi Guqin that Xia Yubing had ridiculed and had never appeared. Such a change, as if heaven and earth had turned upside down, caused everyone to be stunned, as if they had fallen into a dream. The upper echelons of the 7 major forces were a little dazed. For a moment, they couldn't come back to their senses. He had killed so many heaven's favorites and killed his way out of the encirclement. If even such a heaven's favorite was considered trash, then how could the others live? In an instant, many gazes landed on Xia Yubing. Among these gazes, some were questioning, some were strange, some were mocking, and some were waiting for a good show. After all, from the very beginning, Xia Yubing had never concealed her ambition to become a sword master. Previously, he had spared no effort to smear Yi Guqin's name, making him an existence that everyone despised. But now, the cowardly coward Yi Guqin that Xia Yubing spoke of had not only appeared, he had even appeared right before Xia Yubing's eyes from start to finish. Furthermore, he had even displayed all sorts of astonishing accomplishments. This was undoubtedly a slap to Xia Yubing's face. Yi Guqin didn't even need to say a single word to put Xia Yubing in an extremely awkward and ashamed state. Even those martial artists who had clamored for Xia Yubing to become a sword master felt their cheeks burn with pain. Their shouts were stuck in their throats, and the shock in their eyes didn't disperse for a long time. No. How is this possible? How is it possible that it's you? Dugu. Yi Gu, if one were to talk about the person whose emotions were fluctuating the most at this moment, it would undoubtedly be Xia Yubing. When she saw the familiar yet unfamiliar handsome face under the human skin mask, Xia Yubing's mind went blank, as if 100,000 thunderbolts had exploded. She couldn't believe it, and she wasn't willing to believe it. The Yi Guqin that she had always looked down on and wanted to trample under her feet, was actually Dugu Wubai. One moment in heaven, one moment in hell. This kind of disparity, for Xia Yubing, was simply an extremely absurd feeling. When Yi Guqin hadn't appeared at the start of the elite gathering, Xia Yubing was still sneering in her heart. She had thought too highly of Yi Guqin, and didn't even dare to appear at the elite gathering. But now, looking at it, Xia Yubing felt like she was a clown. Everything she did was seen by Yi Guqin, who had transformed into Dugu Wubai. Her countless schemes, her shrewdness, and her plan to seize the title of Sword Master were all shattered the moment Yi Guqin revealed his true identity. Because Dugu Wubai's battle achievements were already enough to shock everyone. And Yi Guqin revealing his identity at this moment caused his reputation to soar like the sun in the sky. After all, a single Dugu Wubai was already incomparably shocking. If this Dugu Wubai's true identity was still the sword master that had risen up once again, then his influence would be even greater. Yi Guqin had only revealed his face, yet all of Xia Yubing's schemes had been destroyed, and it had even caused Yi Guqin's reputation to soar. This enormous contrast made Xia Yubing's mind dizzy for a moment. She couldn't even stand steadily, and felt as if she was about to fall. Xia Yubing's expression continuously changed, alternating between green and white, and her face was filled with disbelief. Yi Guqin faintly smiled as he touched his face, and said with an indifferent tone. Xia Yubing, how long has it been since you last saw me? Have you already forgotten what I look like? If it were someone who didn't know, they would think that it was a conversation between lovers who hadn't seen each other for a long time. However, in the past, Yi Guqin and Xia Yubing's relationship was indeed like that. But now, Yi Guqin's words only caused Xia Yubing's expression to become even more unsightly. She felt as if she had nowhere to vent her feelings of depression. Dugu Wu Bai. Yi Guqin. Ha, Yubing really is smart all her life, but stupid this time. Xia Yubing tightly knitted her brows, and her jade-like hands clutched her chest. Her heart seemed to ache faintly. Of course, it wasn't because she was injured, but because her anger had attacked her heart. Those who humiliate others will be humiliated by others. Your schemes have been exhausted, and your life has been ruined. Yi Guqin pointed his meteor-soft sword at Xia Yubing. The atmosphere between the two seemed to have frozen. However, the shock in the hearts of the surrounding spectators still continued. Brother Yi, you really hid it from me. Chu Qingqi shook his head and smiled bitterly. On the side, Elder Qinghe's old face was also a little red. This was because he had some prejudice against the sword master who hadn't come yet. Now that his identity was revealed, he felt a little embarrassed. Only Feng Manlu's face was calm, and he wasn't surprised at all. Although he was blind, his heart was as clear as a mirror. Perhaps he had already guessed this. As for the Limitless Sword sect, Lu Tianying's mind was in a mess, and he was speechless. He didn't expect that Dugu Wubai was the sword master who had made him lose face at the sword-seeking steel. However, at this moment, only fear was left in Lu Tianying's eyes as he looked at Yi Guqin. Just Dugu Wubai alone was enough to frighten him. At this moment, when the two identities were added together, Lu Tianying didn't dare to have any thoughts of revenge against Yi Guqin. Dugu Wubai is the sword master. With such a temperament, this boy is unfathomable. Xian Tai was also very surprised. On the side, Xian Ying's pupils suddenly shrank. Yi Guqin was the second junior who could be evaluated by Xian Tai as unfathomable. As for the first person, it was naturally the top genius of the Sun Moon Hall, Xian Hao. This made Xianing unhappy, and at the same time, he also had a deep fear of Yi Guqin. In addition, Qin Baijian and the other two spiritual Bridge of Heaven and Earth experts who had been watching the battle all this time looked even more serious. The killing intent in their eyes became so strong that it couldn't be dispersed. This boy must die. Chapter 196. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators, Princess Yuanyang stood there in a daze. It's him. It's really him. The person I like will never disappoint me. Princess Yuanyang covered her red lips with her hands as her vision blurred. Yi Guqin, who had disappointed her, was actually Dugu Wubai, who had saved her life. This unexpected turn of events made Princess Yuanyang feel like she was in a dream. The person she was infatuated with would rise again like a blazing sun, even more dazzling than before. As for Princess Yuanyang, she could no longer have anything to do with Yi Guqin. There was another woman who felt the same way as Princess Yuanyang. It was Xia Shishir. I finally understand what you mean by repaying the karma of that day. Xia Shishir smiled as tears streamed down her face. Repaying the karma meant that they were no longer involved. How is this possible? That trash. He's actually Dugu Wubai. Xia Ying'er was stunned as her mind went blank. She hated Yi Guqin, but she had a trace of respect for Dugu Wubai, who had saved her life. Xia Ying'er couldn't accept this and felt like she was being torn apart. As for Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing, although they had some guesses, they couldn't be sure. Now that Yi Guqin's true identity was revealed, Song Daojin and Chu Shiqing could only look at each other with bitter smiles. They were once the 7 prodigies of the Milky Way province, but the gap between them and Yiguchen was like heaven and earth. Yiguchen and Xia Yubing were facing each other inside the true Qi barrier. The surrounding prodigies, Yuan Mia, Shintu Miao, and the others were also looking at Yiguchen in astonishment. However, there were only 3 people who were the most shocked. One of them was Su Jianshi. She didn't expect that the taciturn youth who had traveled with her was Yiguchen, the famous sword sect's Yiguchen. At the same time, he was the opponent that Su Jianshi wanted to spar with. Foolish brat, you actually deceived me for so long. I'll deal with you later, but... Su Jianshi glanced at Yiguchen's handsome side profile with her heart beating wildly. He looks more handsome in person than in the mask. Su Jianshi's focus was different from the others. As for Murong Ditian, he was staring at Yiguchen with a hateful gaze that seemed as if he was going to devour Yiguchen. The grudges between him and Yiguchen couldn't be resolved. Now that Yiguchen had revealed his true form, Murong Ditian felt as if he was being toyed with. This was something that Murong Ditian was unable to accept. However, he did not act rashly because the threat that Yiguchen posed to him now was even greater than before. As for the last person, it was the gray-robed man. When he saw Yiguchen, his body trembled violently. It's actually you. Young Master Yi. The gray-robed man whispered. If Yiguchen were to hear this voice, he would definitely recognize it. However, right now, Yiguchen clearly didn't notice the gray-robed man. His gaze was fixed on Xia Yubing. Although Xia Yubing's expression fluctuated and her emotions fluctuated violently, she gradually calmed down. Tens of thousands of cultivators from the 7 great forces were all looking at Xia Yubing and Yiguchen. There was no need to talk about the enmity between them. Yiguchen, you have indeed surprised Yubing. Yubing didn't expect that you, who viciously plotted against me in the Sword Monarch's secret realm, would actually appear in front of me as if nothing had happened. Xia Yubing bit her red lips lightly. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation when she said these words that inverted black and white. It was as if this was the truth. Not only that, there seemed to be a bit of mist appearing in her ice-blue eyes. Xia Yubing was crying. Many cultivators were stunned for a moment. One had to know that Xia Yubing's temperament had always been cold and calm. She was like a fairy exiled from a snowy mountain. She didn't show much emotion. A little girl's action like crying had almost never appeared on Xia Yubing's face before. However, she was crying now. Sparkling teardrops hung on her eyelashes. She wasn't crying loudly, but her faint sobbing was even more heart-wrenching. Yeah, so what if this Yiguchen appeared? Previously, Lady Xia and this Yiguchen were publicly acknowledged as Dao companions. In the end, Yiguchen went crazy and plotted against Lady Xia in the Sword Monarch's secret realm. With such a person, no matter how strong he is, it's hard for him to bear the title of Sword Master. It was unknown where such a voice came from among the many cultivators. Yeah, even an ice fairy like Lady Xia could be so ruthless as to plot against her, all for the sake of monopolizing the Sword Monarch's inheritance. This Yiguchen's character is so insidious. What qualifications does he have to be a sword master? At first, it was only 1 or 2 people. Later, many cultivators began to curse. At this moment, Xia Yubing was like a pear blossom in the rain. Her sobbing appearance was indeed pitiful. Some of the male warriors who were infatuated with Xia Yubing even wanted to rush into the real Qi shield and fight Yiguchen to the death. Yiguchen is a hypocrite. He plotted against Fairy Yubing. He's a despicable person. How can such a person be a sword master? It seemed that someone had fanned the flames. The situation that had been overturned by Yiguchen seemed to be reversed again. You. Shameless. Su Jianshi was furious. She gritted her teeth and felt wronged for Yiguchen. She knew very well what kind of person Yiguchen was. However, among the tens of thousands of cultivators, there were still people who continued to curse. However, there were also some who remained on the sidelines and watched the situation develop. things are getting more interesting now. The upper echelons of the 7 major factions were clearly not ignorant people. However, they didn't stand out either. They only watched the contest between the two. No matter who won in the end, it didn't matter to the 7 major factions. Only the prodigy who won in the end was qualified to gain their favor. Yiguchen's expression didn't change amidst the cursing. He turned his gaze to Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing covered her face with her jade-like hands and seemed to be crying. However, the corners of her mouth curved into a mocking smile. She was clearly mocking Yiguchen. Yiguchen shook his head slightly. He had underestimated this scheming childhood sweetheart of his. Xia Yubing, I have to say that you've exceeded my expectations. I can't compare to you in terms of scheming. Yiguchen was very calm amidst the harsh cursing. With Yiguchen's sword demon temperament, there were very few situations that could make him emotional. This bit of cursing was almost negligible to Yiguchen. Yubing doesn't know what you're talking about. However, your attitude and actions have made Yubing's heart extremely cold. Xia Yubing raised her jade-like hands and wiped away her tears. However, there was a trace of mockery in her eyes that only Yiguchen could see. No need to put on an act. Don't you want my life? I'm right here. Let's fight. Yiguchen held his calamity dust sword horizontally. The tip of the sword was suffused with a cold light. Xia Yubing's eyes flashed. The surrounding prodigies seemed to have sensed something. One of them opened his mouth and said, Yiguchen, a despicable person like you actually dares to make a move against Fairy Yubing. We can all cut down a malignant tumor like you. Following this prodigy's roar, a total of 5 prodigies in the surroundings erupted at the same time. True Qi surged out and attacked Yiguchen. In the blink of an eye, the 6 prodigies released their killing moves and attacked Yiguchen. This sudden scene was out of everyone's expectations. However, Yiguchen seemed to have sensed something. He sneered and said, You're still hiding this move. Xia Yubing, you're really meticulous. However, Yiguchen attacked. The Calamity Dust Sword's 42 weapon meridians lit up. At the same time, the Broken Edge Spirit Mark and the Violent Thunder Spirit Mark were activated. In an instant, the Calamity Dust Sword was surrounded by lightning. Cold light filled the sky, as if it could shatter the void. Wind stab, Yiguchen attacked. Blood light filled the sky and cut the throat of a prodigy. When Tu Han, he walked leisurely and waved his sword horizontally. Sword light flashed and cut another prodigy into pieces. Who will drink with me? Yiguchen recited a poem as his sword moved gracefully. A demonic sword pierced through the chest of another prodigy. Who dares to block me? The Calamity Dust Sword vibrated and the sword wave spread out, turning a prodigy in front of him into dust. The sword returns. The person will not return. As Yiguchen's last sentence fell, the true qi in his body circulated. The Calamity Dust Sword emitted a monstrous blood light. It was as if the Azura Sword God had emerged from hell. God-slaying sword technique, Yellow Springs. The huge blood-colored sword river directly tore apart the bodies of the 2 prodigies in front of him. Blood filled the sky and fell like rain, accompanied by snow. What fell was bright red and dazzling snow. In the rain of blood, the sword demon was not stained by a single drop of blood. At this moment, he was the blood hell Azura. At this moment, he was the sword demon. The sword returns. The person will not return. The Calamity Dust Sword pointed directly at Xia Yubing. My sword sect Yiguchen does not ask for much. I only want to borrow your life. Chapter 197. The heavens and earth were silent, and the rain of blood was silent. Only Yiguchen, with a sword in his hand, casually killed the 6 geniuses. How heroic was that? Many sword cultivators who were watching the battle were fascinated, and their eyes were filled with fervor. This was the highest realm of sword cultivators. Killing one person in 10 steps, leaving no trace for 1,000 miles. Even if all the geniuses came out, they wouldn't be able to stop the sword in Yiguchen's hand. Where the sword pointed, life and death would be decided. Xia Yubing, let's fight. Yiguchen's cold shout shook the 9 heavens. His feet stepped on the ground, and his true energy exploded. His body leapt up like a swan, and his sword flickered with cold light as it pierced towards Xia Yubing's head. All the grudges were laid down under the sword. Yiguchen, you forced Yubing to this point. You're heartless, so don't blame Yubing for being unjust. Xia Yubing stopped crying. At this moment, her icy blue eyes were incomparably cold, as if she had returned to her previous state of an ice goddess. As long as I can kill you, all obstacles will be swept away. Xia Yubing said coldly in her heart. She took out the glacier sword and slashed out as well. One was the famous sword cultivator genius of the Saint Origin dynasty, the sword master Yiguchen, who had risen again after the fall of his halo. The other was the North River Sword King's inheritance, Xia Yubing, who had appeared out of nowhere as a genius. This duel would attract everyone's attention. Even Yuan Mia, Shintu Miao, and the other geniuses had retreated far away to the edge of the true energy barrier to make space for the two. Because they knew that this was the destined battle between Yiguchen and Xia Yubing. Clang! The Calamity Dust Sword and the Glacier Sword clashed, and the sound of metal clashing resounded. The surging and sharp sword chi spread out in all directions. It was just a single strike, but the ripples were extremely violent. The spreading sword chi made the scalps of some of the martial artists go numb. 9th cycle of chi refinement, your realm is inferior to mine. Xia Yubing's sword shook, and she only took half a step back. On the other hand, Yiguchen took 2 steps back. One's cultivation level is not everything. Yiguchen once again charged forward with his sword. His eyes were cold and his moves were also extremely vicious. Futile. Xia Yubing shook her head slightly. Even though Yiguchen had the achievement of killing Qin Aoshi, in her eyes, he was still slightly inferior. She already had a half-step divine soul cultivation and was able to use her soul force. This was also one of Xia Yubing's methods. However, there seemed to be a faint fluctuation spreading out from her icy blue eyes. Yiguchen instantly felt as if there were countless people whispering in his mind, irritating him. This level of influence is useless against me. Yiguchen's pitch-black eyes were instantly swallowed by the color of blood. Eye of Azura, activate. At the same time, Yiguchen used the soul-burning secret technique. An intense burning sensation came from the depths of his soul, causing Yiguchen's face to pale slightly. But as the soul-burning secret technique was used, Yiguchen's eye of Azura became as dark as blood, causing one's heart to palpitate in fear. This. Even with Xia Yubing's half-step divine soul cultivation, she was instantly stunned. In her mind, she seemed to see herself when she was young. She was all alone, leaning on Yiguchen's back, hiding in the shadows, weak and powerless. This is an illusion technique. Xia Yubing bit her red lips, instantly sobering up. However, the killing move was already in front of her. God-slaying sword art, blood slaughter. The blood-red Azura power flowed over the tribulation dust sword, scarlet and dazzling. Yiguchen's sword stabbed towards Xia Yubing's chest, not holding back in the slightest. So what if it's an illusion technique? Xia Yubing raised her sword to block, the tip of the tribulation dust sword touching the glacier sword. In the blink of an eye, the Azura power exploded and blood-red sword energy soared into the heavens. Pang! Xia Yubing's figure was blasted back. On her flawless face, there was only a tiny wound left behind by the sword energy. A drop of blood slid down her snowy face. The surrounding world was silent. Many martial artists looked at Yiguchen in a daze. What happened just now? Why was Xia Yubing so absent-minded? Who knows? Could it be some sort of soul illusion technique? But Yiguchen is only at the 9th revolution of energy refining, so how can he use his soul force? TSK, this Xia Yubing suffered a small loss. Although Yi Guqin's damage to Xia Yubing was minuscule, his cultivation was only at the 9th revolution of energy refining. There was still a large gap between him and a half-step divine soul. To be able to cause such a small amount of damage had already surpassed everyone's expectations. A secret technique? Xia Yubing stretched out a finger, wiping away the drop of blood. God-slaying sword art, demon only. Yi Guqin's figure didn't stop. After using blood slaughter, he once again slashed out with his sword. This sword art, demon only. A fierce and unstoppable sword move rumbled towards Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's icy true qi gathered. The glacier sword in her hand also emitted an endless cold light. Glacier sword art, heavenly snow scattering splendor. Cold sword light suddenly spread out. It was as if the sky was filled with flying snow. Every sword light contained a terrifying might that could kill a 5th revolution of energy refining martial artist. Boom! Yi Guqin slashed out with his sword. The blood-colored sword light smashed through the numerous sword lights, heading straight for Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's expression changed slightly. The might of the god-slaying sword art had exceeded her expectations. However, the situation was still within Xia Yubing's control. She slashed out again. Her entire body was filled with cold air. She had activated a trace of ice sword intent. Combined with the glacier sword art, the might was even more powerful. Glacier sword art, icicle break. Endless cold air gathered in front of Xia Yubing, transforming into an iceberg-like true qi phantom. Boom! Yi Guqin's soul demon sword landed on the ice mountain's shadow with a loud boom. Kacha, although it was only formed from true qi, it was like a real iceberg. It actually started to crack. True energy condensation. That's a technique that only true divine soul powerhouses can use. This Xia Yubing only has a half-step divine soul cultivation, so how could she have such a manifestation? Some martial artists were incomparably shocked. However, how could they know that Xia Yubing was only able to do this with the help of a trace of ice sword intent? Retreat! Yi Guqin suddenly felt a sense of danger. The golden true qi in his qi sea surged out, condensing into the phantom of a guardian Vajra on the surface of his body. It was the spiritual rank defensive martial art, Luo Tian protection. Bang! The illusory iceberg exploded with a loud bang. Immediately after, countless icicles violently surged in all directions. Such a wide-range attack caused the faces of some of the geniuses within the true energy barrier to change drastically. Pucci, some of the geniuses were affected and had their bodies pierced through by the icicles. This was only the periphery. Yi Guqin, who was in the center of the battlefield, received the most concentrated attacks. Boom! 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 The dense icicles bombarded the phantom of the guardian Vajra, causing ripples to spread out like water. A big killing move. Yi Guqin coldly said as he slashed out with his sword again. His calamity dust sword appeared. His sword move seemed to depict the trajectory of the Great Thousand World. Countless sword threads spread out, directly shattering the icicles in front of him. Great Thousand Sword Art. Xia Yubing was clearly not unfamiliar with Yi Guqin's sword technique. Her eyes revealed a strange light, and even more so, a deeply hidden hatred. She had once begged Yi Guqin to teach her the myriad sword canon and Great Thousand Sword Art. However, Yi Guqin did not teach her because of his father's warning when he was young. This was also one of the reasons why Xia Yubing had turned dark. This sword art of yours makes Yubing hate it. Xia Yubing's voice was as cold as water. She slashed out with her sword again, the might of her sword aura spreading out in all directions. She wanted to kill Yi Guqin. Chapter 198. Styx River Sword Art, Ice Phoenix Break. Xia Yubing's true qi gathered within her body. Dense ice true qi gathered on the glacier sword. Her weapon veins lit up, and at the same time, the ice spirit marks were activated, causing the already extremely cold sword Qi to become even colder. An illusory sword Qi ice phoenix wrapped around the glacier sword. Xia Yubing's sword pierced forward like a flying immortal. This was a small special move of a spirit-level sword art. Adding a trace of ice sword intent and the glacier sword's support, its power multiplied by several times. At this moment, Xia Yubing's sword appeared. Wherever it passed, the ground would be covered in frost. Yi Guqin shook his blood and Azura force surged, causing the Calamity Dust sword to release an extremely glaring blood-red light. At the same time, the Heavenly Sun profound underworld fire surged out from his body, wrapping around him. It could slightly block the ice chi released by Xia Yubing. God-killing sword art, Yellow Springs. Yi Guqin also slashed out with his sword. True chi surged on the blood-red sword edge. The power of Azura fused with his true chi. It seemed to have transformed into a majestic Yellow Springs river as it rushed towards Xia Yubing. This was a clash of extreme moves, causing everyone to be unable to take their eyes off it. At the same time, their throats became dry. Such a powerful sword move made their scalps go numb. Boom! The blood-red sword light collided with the ice chi, erupting with a deafening explosion. Within the crisscrossing sword chi, Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin engaged in close combat. This pair of Golden Boy and Jade Girl of the Milky Way Prefecture, a couple envied by countless people, were now facing life and death. Only one of them could survive. Clang! A series of sounds of swords colliding rang out. Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin's sword attacks were shockingly fast. The spectating cultivators could only see streaks of afterimages, unable to see their movements clearly. These two are both terrifying. Even some sword cultivators who had been immersed in the way of the sword for a long time sighed at their own inferiority. Bang! Yi Guqin slashed out with his sword. Xia Yubing blocked it with her sword. However, he instead used wave-like subtle steps. As his figure flashed, he extended his other hand. True chi surged, and he pointed towards Xia Yubing. Not good. Xia Yubing's expression suddenly changed. She sensed a type of danger. 6 Pulses Godly Sword. The true chi in Yi Guqin's chi-si followed the tendons and veins in his arm and gathered in his palm. In the end, it gushed out from his fingertips and transformed into streaks of sharp sword chi, shooting explosively towards Xia Yubing's head. Mystic Ice Finger. Xia Yubing also used her finger martial arts. Streams of icy sword aura gushed out and collided with the 6-pulse divine sword aura. True chi exploded. Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps again, using his sword techniques to entangle Xia Yubing while releasing the 6-pulse divine sword. That sword master is really something. He can actually split his attention to use finger techniques while using sword techniques. Some of the warriors were stunned. Even the people from the 7 great factions were a little shocked. It was extremely rare to see such a multitasking method. Looks like you also have some tricks up your sleeve. Xia Yubing's expression became serious. Whether it was the 6-pulse divine sword or wave-like subtle steps, they were both top-tier martial arts. Xia Yubing had never seen them before. Thus, she became a little more vigilant towards Yi Guqin. Following Yi Guqin's multitasking technique, everyone was somewhat shocked to discover that Xia Yubing actually faintly showed signs of being suppressed. Seeing that victory seemed to be tilting towards Yi Guqin, Su Jianxue couldn't help but shout, "Silly boy, you can do it. It's not that simple. Xia Yubing is only probing. The two of them are trying to figure out each other's trump cards," said Bai Yanji as he gently fanned himself. Just when everyone thought that Xia Yubing had temporarily fallen into a disadvantageous position, she made her move again. Her lotus feet moved, and her speed increased by several times. This is a movement martial art? Seeing Xia Yubing's speed increase, Yi Guqin faintly frowned. The corner of Xia Yubing's mouth rose into a sneer. The traceless snow steps she used was the inheritance of the North River Sword King. It was a high-grade spiritual tier movement martial art, and its speed was unpredictable. So what if you're fast? Yiguchin's blood-red eyes were like scarlet moons. His Azura words could slow down his opponent's speed. At the same time, Yiguchin once again used the soul ignition secret technique, and illusions appeared in Xia Yubing's mind. Illusions? Yubing won't fall for it again. Xia Yubing also released her soul power to resist Yiguchin's attack. Abyss River Sword Art, Sacred Ice Phoenix Image. Xia Yubing let out a delicate shout as she held her sword with both hands. Intense ice-cold true chi gushed out, and vaguely, it condensed into an ice phoenix divine statue. The terrifying fluctuations emitted from it caused the corners of the eyes of the heaven prides who had retreated far away to twitch slightly. Go! Xia Yubing unsheathed her sword. A terrifying frost sword aura accompanied the ice phoenix statue's image as it rushed towards Yiguchin. This was the ultimate move of a spiritual tier sword art. It was terrifyingly powerful. One had to know that Su Jianchu's spiritual tier sword art's ultimate move had forced back 3 sky prides of the same level. But now, Xia Yubing's cultivation was clearly higher than Su Jianchu's. Adding on the ice sword intent and frost true energy, this ultimate move's power was boundless. Yiguchin took a deep breath in the face of this sword that made everyone tremble in fear. He unsheathed his tribulation dust sword and drew a circle. At the same time, he faintly added a trace of hard and soft sword intent. This extreme circle seemed to be able to contain and swallow all things. It was the Taiji sword art. Can Yiguchin block this move? I feel like this move from the sword sect isn't that strong. The cultivators on the outside discussed. Compared to Xia Yubing's powerful sword move, Yiguchin's sword move was silent and didn't fluctuate much. But it was this sword move that made Feng Manlu, Xian Tai, and the other peak experts frown. This sword technique is interesting. I've never heard of it before. Although Feng Manlu was blind, his soul perception was sharp. Moreover, he had immersed himself in the sword Dao for many years, so he could naturally sense the flow of sword aura. Seeing Yiguchin's simple sword move, Xia Yubing didn't relax in the slightest. Boom! The ice phoenix sacred image fiercely collided with Yiguchin's sword. The frost sword aura instantly spread out, causing Yiguchin's hands to stiffen. The web between his thumb and index finger was torn by the violent force, causing blood to flow out. Puchi! Yiguchin spat out a mouthful of blood as he retreated several steps. He couldn't stop himself at all. The sword sect is about to lose. Some people exclaimed. Yiguchin retreated several dozen steps, coughing blood from the corner of his mouth. But his gaze was sharp, his expression serious, and his Dantian sea of qi started to circulate. Yiguchin stomped the ground fiercely. With a boom, Yiguchin's retreating figure suddenly stopped. His feet sank deeply into the ground, but he still managed to receive this move. Xia Yubing raised her eyebrows. Yiguchin's performance exceeded her expectations. Xia Yubing, I'll return all of your sword moves to you. Although there was blood at the corner of Yiguchin's mouth, he wasn't dispirited at all. The Taiji sword technique was about borrowing force to fight force. As long as one could receive this sword move, they would be able to reflect it. Go! Yiguchin swung his sword with all his strength. The terrifying sword move that had been swallowed by the Taiji sword technique actually spread out again, rushing towards Xia Yubing. Such an unforeseen event caused Xia Yubing to be momentarily stunned. She circulated the true energy in her body and hurriedly blocked with her sword. Bang! Xia Yubing's figure was blasted back, a faint trace of blood flowing from the corner of her mouth. All of the spectating fighters felt their hearts rise. This battle was simply impossible to take their eyes off. Just a moment ago, Yiguchin was still coughing up blood, and in the blink of an eye, Xia Yubing was injured again. This is truly a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. Exciting. Someone from the 7 great powers clicked his tongue and sighed. Yiguchen, you have indeed exceeded Yubing's expectations. However, the outcome will not change. Xia Yubing slowly raised her hand, and dark blue formation patterns appeared. As Xia Yubing pressed her hand down, the formation patterns extended along the ground covered in frost and snow. That is. Yiguchen's pupils constricted. Heavenly frost flowing snow sword formation. Xia Yubing shouted clearly, and the light of the formation patterns surged. The wind and snow in the surroundings seemed to have been summoned, transforming into thousands of flying swords of ice and snow, shooting towards Yiguchen in unison. This was Xia Yubing's hidden killing move. Chapter 199. The runes of the sword array spread. Accompanied by a sky full of snow, tens of thousands of sparkling and translucent flying swords shot towards Yiguchen. This was a true attack of tens of thousands of swords. Mid-grade mortal grade sword array. Feeling the power of this sword array, Yiguchen's expression changed slightly. This heavenly frost flowing snow sword array was even stronger than the little Ashura sword array he had used before. This was a sword array that could threaten even divine soul experts. Yiguchen also had a sword array. It was the 6 Paths Ashura sword array he had obtained in the 18 Blood Prison. However, the 6 Paths Ashura sword array's level was too high. It was an Earth-grade sword array that could threaten Divine Palace and Celestial Palace experts. It was not something Yiguchen could activate right now. Xia Yubing is only at the half-step Divine Soul realm. If she wants to activate this mid-grade mortal-grade sword array, she won't be able to last for long. Yiguchen's eyes flashed as he thought of a countermeasure. Oh, is delaying tactics of any use? Since Yubing has activated her sword array, she can naturally kill you. As if she had seen through Yiguchen's strategy, Xia Yubing's lips curved up in a cold smile. She raised her jade hand and the sparkling and translucent flying swords that filled the sky flew with her hand. Then, they surrounded Yiguchen from all directions. Yiguchen displayed his Taiji sword art. His sword drew a circle, as if it wanted to completely destroy these flying swords. However, Puchi. A sparkling and translucent flying sword cut through Yiguchen's arm, leaving behind a bloody wound. Another flying sword cut through Yiguchen's cheek, leaving behind a trail of blood. Although these sparkling and translucent flying swords were not real and were condensed from ice true chi, their power could not be underestimated. Moreover, the flying swords came from all directions. The Taiji sword art could not completely defend against them. It's over. I didn't expect Xia Yubing to have a mid-grade mortal grade sword array. This is a sword array that can deal with divine soul experts. Yiguchen is in danger. Some martial artists who maintained a neutral attitude shook their heads. She's actually capable of activating a mid-tier soul-tier sword formation. This Xia Yubing has concealed her strength quite deeply. Some of the higher-ups of the 7 great powers sighed. Foolish kid. Su Jinsher's eyes were filled with worry as she clenched her fists in front of her chest. Trust in young Master Yi, Zither Fairy consoled. However, even they sighed. Even Yuan Mia, Shintu Miao, and the others would not feel good if they were trapped in such a sword formation. Yiguchen, you can just die inside. Murong Ditian's gaze was filled with bone-deep hatred and was extremely cold. Yiguchen was trapped in the center of the sword formation, and the flying swords that filled the sky shot toward him like rain. Even with the Taiji swordsmanship, Yiguchen was still injured in many places. Yiguchen, it's over, said Xia Yu coldly as she watched Yiguchen being tossed around by the thousands of ice swords. Oh, is that so? Yiguchen's figure suddenly stopped as he slowly raised one of his hands, as if he was about to execute some kind of ultimate move. What other moves do you have? Xia Yubing's gaze focused. Maintaining the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation consumed a lot of her energy, so she had to kill Yiguchen in the shortest amount of time possible. However, facing the ice swords that filled the sky, Yiguchen had instead stopped dodging. Heaven-splitting sword soul, come out. Yiguchen circulated the true energy within his body. Shortly after, a green sword soul surged out from his body like a torrent. It was as if a green river had rushed out from his body. The surging sword chi shook the surroundings. With Yiguchin's current cultivation, he could activate 5,000 heaven-splitting sword souls at full power. The more heaven-splitting sword souls there were, the more powerful they would be. The powerful heaven-splitting sword soul scattered in all directions, as if it could cut through the void. The ice swords that filled the sky and fell towards Yiguchin all collided with the heaven-splitting sword souls, causing rumbling sounds to erupt. However, with the heaven-splitting sword souls, the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation was actually unable to obstruct Yiguchin at all. What kind of move is this? Some warriors were dumbfounded. Especially some sword cultivators, they had no idea what the sword chi that came out of Yiguchin's body was. This is... Feng Manlu of the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas frowned slightly. When Yiguchin took out 5,000 heaven-splitting sword souls, Xia Yubing's expression also changed slightly. Maintaining the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation required a lot of true energy and soul power. However, Yiguchin's heaven-splitting sword souls only consumed true energy. With Yiguchin's 1,000 feet long energy sea, he could completely support the consumption. This is a little troublesome. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. Only now did she truly look at Yiguchin seriously. This Yiguchin, who was crippled by Gu Xiaoyang and rose again, made Xia Yubing feel that she was out of control for the first time. She held her sword and attacked, the tip of her sword filled with cold air. As the ice swords that filled the sky and the heaven-splitting sword souls collided, Xia Yubing and Yiguchin once again fought. The swords intersected, dazzling the eyes. Outsiders were unable to catch the speed of their swords. When Xia Yubing attacked with her sword, snowflakes and frost splashed out. Xia family's frost sword arts, you actually know how to use Xiantian sword arts? Yiguchin was astonished. Xia Yubing smiled coldly. The glacier sword vibrated and an extremely cold sword chi soared into the sky. The surrounding land was covered in white frost. This was the frost sword art's ultimate move. Are you trying to show off to me? You want to humiliate me with your Xiantian sword arts? Yiguchin thought to himself. At the same time, his gaze was extremely sharp. He also attacked with his sword. The sword's shadow was as fast as daylight. Aurora Fast Sword's ultimate move, Waning Rainbow. With Yiguchin's current strength and comprehension, he could easily comprehend the Xiantian sword art's ultimate move. You actually have the face to use my Xia family's sword arts. Xia Yubing coldly scolded. The two ultimate moves collided. The frost sword arts exploded with an extremely cold air, while the Aurora Fast Sword was unbreakable. It directly broke through the tip of the glacier sword. In front of Xia Yubing, a white jade-like tortoise shell appeared. There were spirit patterns engraved on it. As the spirit patterns blossomed with divine light, the tortoise shell suddenly expanded. It was like a white jade shield, blocking Yiguchin's sword. The sound of metal clashing resounded. Spirit pattern defensive divine weapon. Yiguchin raised his eyebrows. At the same time, the power of ice and fire surged around his body. The ice and fire dragon crystal armor instantly covered his body. Bang! The two retreated at the same time. Yiguchin's face slightly paled. Although he had the ice and fire dragon crystal armor protecting his body, he was still injured by the recoil. Xia Yubing also retreated continuously. The white tortoise shell was also hit by the recoil and crashed towards her. Looking at the battle that had almost sunk into a state of panic, many spectators held their breaths. They didn't dare to breathe loudly. Yiguchin looked at the unfathomable Xia Yubing opposite him and sighed inwardly. He had to admit that Xia Yubing was indeed an opponent that couldn't be underestimated. The origin ring on his finger flashed, and the meteor soft sword also appeared. Yiguchin actually took out another sword. What is he going to do? Some people were puzzled. Could it be a two-handed sword? But I've never seen Yiguchin use it before. Moreover, if it's a two-handed sword, one of his hands must be slightly unfamiliar with it. Looking at Yiguchin holding a sword with both hands, some sword cultivators shook their heads. Although a two-handed sword was twice as powerful as a one-handed sword, it was easy to control. If the two hands were not coordinated well, it might even have the opposite effect. They had never seen Yiguchin use a two-handed sword, so they didn't think much of it. Do you think you can defeat Yubing just because you have an extra sword? Looking at Yiguchin who was holding a sword with both hands, Xia Yubing couldn't help but find it funny. We'll know once we try. Yiguchin's expression was cold and solemn. He didn't say anything else, and used both hands to attack at the same time. His left hand used the Boundless Heaven Sword Art's minor skill, Boundless Wheel. His right hand used the God-slaying sword art, Solitary Demon. It was the dual sword divergence move. Two extreme moves were used at the same time. Sword chi rushed to the 9 heavens. At this moment, everyone's expression changed drastically. Chapter 200. Yiguchin rarely displayed his dual sword technique in front of others. Therefore, when he unleashed this move, it caused many onlookers to be incomparably stunned. Especially some sword cultivators, their eyes were filled with shock. Only sword cultivators understood how much effort was needed to wield the sword with both hands, and it also required a long period of cultivation. However, using both hands like this could only allow a sword cultivator to wield the sword with both hands at most. It was the first time they had seen someone like Yiguchin, who could perform a spirit-level sword technique with both swords. This completely overturned their understanding. Boom! Yiguchin's figure was like a lonely swan as he charged towards Xia Yubing with the power of both swords. This sword technique was equivalent to doubling the power of both swords. Xia Yubing also revealed an extremely surprised expression. She had some understanding of Yiguchin. After all, they were childhood sweethearts. However, she had never seen Yiguchin practice dual swords. Even if he had extraordinary talent, if he had never cultivated it before, it would be difficult for him to perform a dual sword technique. When did Yiguchin learn dual swords? Xia Yubing bit her red lips. At this critical moment, she could only take out the white tortoise shell again, turning it into a white shield to block Yiguchin's sword technique. However, Yiguchin raised his eyebrows. The Calamity Dust Sword and Meteor Soft Sword's weapon veins were lit up, their power overlapping. At the same time, golden light veins snaked out from his body, sparkling and translucent. It's the sword vein. Some cultivators exclaimed when they saw this. Previously, Yiguchin was able to obtain the title of Sword Master because he had two ultimate moves. The first was naturally his innate ability, the innate sword embryo. The second was the sword vein that could increase the power of sword chi. After that, in the Sword King's secret realm, Yiguchin's sword vein was destroyed by Gu Xiaoyang. But now, Yiguchin had cultivated the sword vein to perfection. 360 sword rays emitted resplendent golden light, making Yiguchin look like a god descending. With the amplification of the perfect sword vein, the power of Yiguchin's dual sword unique skill was stacked again, reaching a terrifying level. The earth split apart with Yiguchin's sword move. The void exploded and let out a sharp howl. Boom! Yiguchin's attack landed heavily on the white tortoise shell. The spirit inscriptions on the white tortoise shell emitted the strongest light as it tried its best to defend against this attack. However, the power of Yiguchin's killing blow was extremely terrifying. Sword chi filled the sky and surged wildly in all directions. It was impossible to block it completely. Bang! The white tortoise shell was blasted back, ruthlessly smashing into Xia Yubing's delicate body. Xia Yubing's face paled. She actually spat out a mouthful of blood, and her figure continuously retreated. Again. Yiguchin had a wealth of combat experience, so how could he miss this opportunity? On his Calamity Dust Sword, the power of Azura condensed like blood as he slashed out once again. God-slaying sword technique, yellow springs. At the same time, he brandished his meteorite soft sword. The sword light was like a wild python, snaking out and tearing the air apart. The ultimate move of the golden snake swordsmanship, mysterious sword light snake. Bang! Bang! Xia Yubing's figure retreated again. Even the white tortoise shell was sent flying to the side. Yi Guqin's eyes flickered like the cold stars in the sky, extremely sharp and fierce. His calamity dust sword pierced towards Xia Yubing's chest. Xia Yubing clenched her teeth and used traceless snow steps. In this short period of time, Yi Guqin actually didn't give Xia Yubing any chance to counterattack. This kind of fighting method made Xia Yubing's heart heavy. Puchi. Finally, Xia Yubing's movement allowed her to dodge Yi Guqin's sword attack. The calamity dust sword brushed past her shoulder. Following the sound of cloth tearing, her snow-white shoulder split open. Blood flowed out from the graze. Yi Guqin flipped his hand, wanting to attack again, but he suddenly felt an extreme danger. Retreat. The vigilance in his heart made Yi Guqin's feet touch the ground, and his figure abruptly retreated. It was also at this moment that an ice sword suddenly burst out from the ground, brushing past Yi Guqin's body. It was only half a finger's distance away from his face. What a scheme! Yi Guqin's footsteps stopped, looking at the young girl who was holding her shoulder not far away. At this moment, a tidal wave of uproar resounded in the surroundings. Even some of the people from the 7 great powers opened their eyes wide. They were extremely shocked by the situation before their eyes. This. Xia Yubing was actually suppressed by Yi Guqin. Xia Yubing can't be blamed. Yi Guqin's fighting experience is simply terrifying. And that two-handed sword, he can actually use a spirit-grade sword technique's ultimate move at the same time. This is simply unheard of. A few people exclaimed, but there were also some people who supported Xia Yubing. They sneered, "What's the rush? Lady Xia hasn't taken out her trump card yet. Have you all forgotten what the greatest opportunity she obtained in the North River Sword King's cave was?" Hearing these words, the crowd nodded their heads in understanding. Although it seemed like Xia Yubing was being suppressed and was at a disadvantage, she still hadn't completely used her trump card. Yi Guqin, you're indeed mysterious. Yubing has never seen you use such a technique before. Although a bloody wound had appeared on her snow-white shoulder, Xia Yubing didn't care about it. She stared at Yi Guqin with cold eyes. There's no point in saying more. Xia Yubing, I know what your trump card is. So use it, or else you won't have another chance. Yi Guqin's two-handed sword vibrated as he spoke with a cold tone. Since Yi Guqin is in such a hurry to die, then Yubing will fulfill your wish. Although Xia Yubing's blue robe was dyed with blood, when she calmly took a step forward, a sword intent that caused everyone's expression to change drastically swept out in all directions like a blizzard. Ice sword intent. Xia Yubing took a step forward, and frost spread out from the ground beneath her feet. She didn't really use it, but the aura she emitted caused everyone's heart to tremble. Sword intent was a technique that only 1 in 10,000 sword cultivators could comprehend. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there were millions of sword cultivators, but those who could comprehend sword intent might not even be 1 in a million. For example, in this elite gathering, only Xia Yubing and Yuan Mie had comprehended sword intent. Including Yi Guqin, there were only 3 people. Even Murong Ditian, a genius of the sword Dao, hadn't comprehended sword intent. One could imagine how rare it was for geniuses to comprehend sword intent. With this sword intent, Xia Yubing is in an undefeatable position. Xian Tai spoke. He was optimistic about Xia Yubing. Not only him, but the majority of the spectators were also shocked by Xia Yubing's sword intent. Their gazes were filled with envy. Su Jianshi and the others' hearts also clenched. They were worried for Yi Guqin. This ice sword intent isn't something you personally comprehended. It's something you inherited from the North River Sword King. Therefore, you've never understood what sword intent is. Yiguchin slightly shook his head and spoke in a low voice. Once these words were spoken, many people frowned. They felt that Yiguchin seemed to be saying sour grapes because he couldn't eat them. Ah, this Yiguchin merely didn't obtain the North River Sword King's inheritance. If the inheritance was placed in front of him, I don't believe that he wouldn't comprehend it. Lu Tianying sneered. Clearly, he was disdainful of Yiguchin's words. However, Xia Yubing didn't reveal a mocking smile. Because she knew that Yiguchin possessed sword intent. I've already shown my trump card. Then, let's fight. Yiguchin's eyes flashed. His black hair fluttered in the wind. At this moment, he was like a sword god awakening. The meteor-flexible sword buzzed and trembled. A similarly profound aura spread out and permeated the surrounding void. This aura is... The eyes of the upper echelons of the 7 major factions shrunk as they stared at Yiguchin. Many sword cultivators were also stunned. Sensing that terrifying aura, some of their hands even began to tremble. This is sword intent. Chapter 201. Yiguchin's soft meteorite sword seemed to have turned into a spiritual snake. At the same time, a mysterious sword intent spread out. It was the hard and soft sword intent. Seeing Yiguchin display sword intent, Xia Yubing frowned slightly, but she wasn't too surprised. After all, in the previous battle, Xia Yubing already knew that Yiguchin possessed the hard and soft sword intent. However, the several tens of thousands of spectators, as well as the people from the 7 major forces, were all somewhat dumbfounded. Sword intent wasn't a martial art that could be obtained through diligent cultivation. Talent, opportunity, and luck were all indispensable. It was precisely because sword intent was difficult to comprehend that sword cultivators with sword intent were so rare. However, at this moment, the people who were originally mocking Yiguchin for being sour grapes all seemed to be mute as they stared blankly at Yiguchin. Even those who weren't sword cultivators could feel the ripples of sword intent. As for Lu Tianying, the sneer on his face didn't completely disappear. At this moment, it was frozen in place, appearing rather comical. This young Master Yi is truly unfathomable. Zither Fairy, Bai Yanji, and the others were also somewhat speechless. After all, Yiguchin brought them wave after wave of shock. Originally, everyone thought highly of Xia Yubing, who possessed the ice sword intent, but now that Yiguchin had also displayed his sword intent, the entire battle became complicated and confusing again. So what if you've comprehended sword intent? Yubing has already comprehended the ice sword intent to the highest level. A cold light seemed to flash in Xia Yubing's ice-blue eyes. She once again displayed the traceless snow steps while holding the glacier sword. She swung her sword horizontally, still using the ultimate move of the Styx River sword art, the Ice Phoenix sacred image, but the power was incomparable. Because this time, Xia Yubing didn't use a trace of the ice sword intent, but completely unleashed it. Clang! The Ice Phoenix divine statue formed by the endless ice sword aura was truly like an ancient phoenix descending into the world. It carried a terrifying power as it violently rushed towards Yiguchin. Wherever it passed, frost filled the sky and the earth froze. Hardness and gentleness, myriad demonic sword shadows. Yiguchin swung his meteorite flexible sword horizontally. His tool meridian lit up, and at the same time, he activated the phantom, gathering, and light spiritual runes, causing the power of the sword move to become even more powerful and unpredictable. In an instant, countless sword lights like a swarm of snakes leaving their nest, covering the sky and the earth as they rushed towards Yubing. At the same time, everyone was shocked to see that those sword lights were not in a straight line. Instead, they were wriggling like snakes. They came from all directions, and from all angles, they attacked fiercely. Clang! 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 Countless sword lights fell on the Ice Phoenix sacred shadow, bursting forth with continuous sounds of collision. However, the Ice Phoenix landed on Yiguchin's body as if it was a dead tree. The dragon was the the Ice Dragon Crystal Armor, defensive spiritual runruns defensive. Bang Zes however, even so, Yiguchin was forced to retreat again, coughing out large mouthfuls of blood. That extremely powerful ice sword aura had even spread into his body, causing it to become somewhat stiff. Xia Yubing obviously wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Her lotus feet moved, and she directly attacked with her sword. At this moment, she was like a fierce sword fairy, each and every one of her attacks was fatal. With the addition of the ice sword intent, the power of Xia Yubing's ice attribute sword techniques was multiplied. Puff! The glacier sword pierced through Yiguchin's shoulder. Xia Yubing's mouth curled into a cold smile, and she directly activated her ice true energy, which entered Yiguchin's body through the glacier sword, wanting to freeze his life force. The heavenly sun profound underworld fire surged out from Yiguchin's body, enveloping Yiguchin and dispelling the coldness in his body. His other hand held the sword and swept towards Xia Yubing's chest. Xia Yubing raised her hand, and ice true energy condensed into an ice sword in the air, blocking Yiguchin's sword. You won't be able to comprehend the pinnacle of sword intent. Xia Yubing seemed to have victory in her grasp, and her glacier sword shook. With a boom, Yiguchin's figure was sent flying. His entire shoulder was dripping with blood, but it was instantly frozen by the ice true energy, forming a blood ice cube. Be careful. Su Jianchu's heart fiercely clenched when she saw Yiguchin injured. It seems that Xia Yubing's sword intent is a level higher. The North River Sword King is an expert of the divine dwelling stage, so his inheritance is naturally complete. Xia Yubing's comprehension of sword intent has almost reached the pinnacle. Although Yiguchin also has sword intent, how can he be Xia Yubing's opponent? As Yiguchin's situation deteriorated, several cultivators began to discuss. Yiguchin, let's end this battle. Xia Yubing held her sword horizontally, and the icy chi from the tip of her sword seemed to be able to freeze the air. Snow drifted down from the sky. Xia Yubing was like a fairy in the snow, but what she brought was death. Hard and soft sword intent, is it that simple? Yiguchin's chi and blood rumbled as they circulated, gathering at his injured shoulder. The wound there quickly began to heal. This was the benefit of a perfect body. In the face of Xia Yubing's fierce sword, Yiguchin's meteoric soft sword struck out again, and a mysterious hard and soft sword intent filled the surroundings. Xia Yubing was somewhat surprised to find that her fierce sword moves seemed to have been imperceptibly weakened when she approached Yiguchin. Soft sword. Yiguchin's meteoric soft sword collided with Xia Yubing's glacier sword. There wasn't an intense collision because the fierce sword chi was completely guided by the meteoric soft sword. At this moment, the meteoric soft sword was like a spirit snake, soft and flexible. Hard sword. Yiguchin's eyes were extremely sharp. In his other hand, the Calamity Dust sword struck out again, activating the Edge Breaker and Thunder Spirit patterns. Adding on the support of the hard and soft sword intent, it seemed to have a sharpness that could shatter space. Xia Yubing's expression changed, and she took out the white tortoise shell again. Break! With the support of the Edge Breaker and hard sword, the Calamity Dust sword struck the white tortoise shell, and actually pierced it by an inch. Immediately after, small cracks began to spread. Xia Yubing's expression changed. Once cracks appeared on the defensive spirit artifact, its defensive power would plummet. Bang! Yiguchin stepped out, sending the cracked white tortoise shell flying, while Xia Yubing's figure quickly retreated. Yiguchin seized the opportunity, and the Calamity Dust sword in his hand struck out. His figure seemed to have pulled out an afterimage, and an extremely sharp sword light burst out with a loud bang. Shadow Kill Sword Art, Vanishing Shadow. Clang! Xia Yubing held her sword horizontally, and felt an extremely sharp sword chi coming from her sword. This sword art is... Xia Yubing's eyes revealed shock. The moment Yiguchin displayed the shadow kill swordsmanship, the gray-robed man, who had been standing at the edge of the area and watching the battle, suddenly trembled. As if she had been struck by lightning, her mind went blank, and only Yiguchin's familiar yet strange sword was left. Impossible. I must have seen wrongly. The gray-robed person muttered in a low voice, her voice trembling. Her mind seemed to have been struck by 100,000 lightning bolts, and her jade-like hands were tightly clenched. Her thin fingernails pierced into her white palm, and blood dripped from between her fingers. But as if the heavens were playing a joke on her, Yiguchin struck out again, and it was also the shadow kill sword art. That familiar sword path was like a nightmare. Every night, it would play countless times in the gray-robed person's mind. Every time she dreamed of it, her heart would bleed. Impossible. The gray-robed person bit her lips until they bled. Only a remnant of her will was supporting her, preventing her from fainting. I want to ask him myself. The gray-robed person's face was as white as paper. Chapter 202. On the stage, Yiguchin used a spirit-grade sword art, the Shadow Assassination Sword Art. The Shadow Assassination Sword Art was not only a sword art, but also a combination of movement techniques. Yiguchin used the shadow steps, and his figure left behind a series of afterimages. Ordinary martial artists could not catch Yiguchin's movements at all. This is the sword art of the Bloodthirst Tower. Although Xia Yubing had not joined the Bloodthirst Tower, she had heard of some of their sword arts. Yiguchin's eyes flashed. He did not plan to hide anything. Although no assassin from the Bloodthirst Tower had ever participated in an elite meeting, Yiguchin did not care. He had already obtained the Azura sword intent, so he did not mind exposing his identity. Not only Xia Yubing, but even some of the surrounding martial artists, including the geniuses, narrowed their eyes. They felt that this assassination sword art was very similar to the sword arts of the Bloodthirst Tower. However, they did not dare to be certain. Many of them had only heard of the Bloodthirst Tower's sword art and had never seen it with their own eyes. At this moment, Yiguchin pushed the Shadow Assassination sword art to the extreme. The sword edge tore through the air, piercing towards Xia Yubing's face. Xia Yubing blocked with her sword, but she could feel the craftiness of Yiguchin's sword art. This made Xia Yubing unable to capture Yiguchin's figure with her sword intent of ice. With a loud clang, the sword edges collided, creating a burst of sparks. Yiguchin's figure retreated again. Then, 1,000 feet of chi brewed in his body. With a stomp of his foot, his speed increased several times. The black robe stuck to his body because of the wind pressure. The Shadow Assassination sword art's ultimate move, instant kill. In almost half a breath's time, Yiguchin's figure appeared as if he had teleported, arriving less than one zhang in front of Xia Yubing. The Shadow Assassination sword art was a spirit-grade middle-grade sword art. Its ultimate move was naturally powerful. Even Xia Yubing's pupils trembled. She was shocked by Yiguchin's speed. Seeing Yiguchin's life-reaping sword edge coming, Xia Yubing also attacked. The glacier sword, accompanied by a monstrous chill, suddenly stabbed out. However, the expected sound of metal colliding did not appear when he pierced the sword. Xia Yubing's sword actually directly passed through Yiguchin's body. Everyone at the scene was dumbfounded, revealing a look of astonishment. When her sword landed on Yiguchin's body, it was as if it had landed on empty air. There was no sound at all, not even a drop of blood. This is the Bloodthirsty Tower's sword technique. Suddenly, a life and death chamber expert watching the battle spoke. He had once escaped from a blood-listening tower's golden-masked assassin. And the swordsmanship used by the gold-masked assassin was exactly the same as the one used by Yiguchin. Bloodthirst Tower. Didn't they say that the Bloodthirst Tower's sword techniques are not allowed to be passed on to outsiders? How did Yiguchin obtain the Bloodthirst Tower's sword techniques? There are only a few famous geniuses in the Bloodthirst Tower. The most famous one in recent times is a genius named Sword Demon. A warrior murmured, and then his face suddenly froze. For a moment, a thought flashed through everyone's mind. At the same time, a wisp of astonishment climbed onto their faces. Sword sect, sword demon, could it be? Many warriors glanced at each other. The shock in their hearts could no longer be described with words. Not only had Yiguchin transformed into Duga Wubai, but he had also once been Bloodthirst Tower's sword demon. This conclusion was like a bomb falling into the sea, setting off monstrous waves. Just Duga Wubai's identity alone was enough to shock everyone. Now, they had come to the conclusion that Sword Sect was Sword Demon. Although Sword Demon's reputation was not as resounding as Duga Wubai's, he was still a peerless assassin whose name was known throughout the Bloodthirst Tower. This. Brother Yi, how many more secrets do you have that you haven't revealed? Chu Qingqi was already beyond shocked, unable to say anything. The hearts of the people from the 7 major factions had even become somewhat numb. Yiguchin's endless identities and methods were like an iron hammer, heavily smashing everyone's hearts again and again. However, only the grey-robed man's body trembled even more violently amidst this shocking uproar, as if he was enduring something. In the field, when Xia Yubing pierced through Yiguchin's body like air, an extreme sense of danger suddenly surged in her heart. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, Xia Yubing pushed her ice sword intent to the extreme. A sword chi that seemed to be able to freeze people's minds spread out from her body. The sound of something freezing could be heard. It was the ice sword chi that had blocked the attack of a sword. At this moment, Yiguchin's figure was shockingly behind Xia Yubing. His calamity dust sword was no more than 3 inches away from the back of Xia Yubing's head. Yiguchin's wrist shook, urging the heavenly sun profound underworld fire. At the same time, sword chi exploded, wanting to pierce through Xia Yubing's head. Xia Yubing's head suddenly tilted. With a bang, the calamity dust sword pierced through the ice sword chi, brushing past the side of Xia Yubing's head, cutting off a few strands of ice blue hair that fluttered in the wind. What a pity! Yiguchin sighed inwardly. The ultimate killing move of the shadow assassination sword art was not only powerful, but also an extreme assassination move. It was able to create an afterimage to confuse the enemy at the same time as the sword strike, and then quietly circle behind the enemy to deliver a fatal blow. However, Xia Yubing's cultivation was powerful, and she was alert. Her ice sword intent exploded, causing Yiguchin's sword to miss. If such an assassination sword technique did not succeed the first time, it would be very difficult to confuse Xia Yubing a second time. Yiguchin, you've really angered Yubing. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes were extremely cold. Just now, if not for her quick mind and her ice sword intent, she might have really been pierced through by Yiguchin's sword. That kind of life and death crisis made Xia Yubing's heart surge with anger. In her eyes, Yiguchin, who was destined to be stepped on by her, had actually threatened her life. Xia Yubing could not accept this. Xia Yubing, what is your trump card? Show it. Yiguchin coldly stared at Xia Yubing. Although Xia Yubing had already activated her ice sword intent, Yiguchin still felt that Xia Yubing seemed to be hiding something. Xia Yubing's shrewdness made Yiguchin have no choice but to be cautious. What? Could it be that Xia Yubing still has a trump card that she hasn't used yet? Many people were shocked when they heard Yiguchin's words. In their eyes, Xia Yubing, who had completely activated her ice sword intent, was already extremely powerful. Could it be that she still had not used her full strength? Ha! Ha! Xia Yubing laughed. Her laughter carried disdain. She looked at Yiguchin and said with a deep gaze. Yiguchin, you have indeed exceeded Yubing's expectations. Yubing actually also knows that you should still be hiding something. However, it doesn't matter. Next, no matter what trump card you use, even if it's the hard and soft sword intent, you will not be able to contend against me. Xia Yubing's words carried extreme confidence, as if victory was already in her hands. Oh. Yiguchin waited with rapt attention. This is what Yubing obtained when she entered the Sword King Mystery Realm for the second time. Xia Yubing flipped her hand and put away the glacier sword. Then, she took out another sword. The moment this sword appeared, its aura was astonishing. The coldness it emitted caused everyone to tremble. This is a divine weapon with mystical patterns. Someone cried out in disbelief. Chapter 203. Mystical rune divine weapons were rarer and more powerful than spirit rune divine weapons. Spirit runes resonated with each other, forming a formation to amplify the weapon's power. Of course, mystical rune divine weapons were not something that could be forged by ordinary blacksmiths. At the very least, only blacksmiths above 5 stars had the ability to forge them. Moreover, the success rate was not high. The mystical rune divine weapon that Xia Yubing took out was dark blue in color. The sword's body was winding like a dragon's body, emitting a deep chilling intent. The sword's hilt seemed to be lined with dragon scales. Along with the infusion of true qi, many spirit runes appeared on the sword's body, faintly emitting a frightening aura. This Frosthorn Dragon sword was the sword that North River Sword King Chu Donglu used when he became a Sword King. Using it to kill you is like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Xia Yubing shook her head slightly, seemingly disdainful. Chu Donglio's Sword King divine weapon. Many people stared at it in shock. How powerful was the sword of a Sword King? Xia Yubing's glacier sword was merely the sword that Chu Donglu used when he was young. Only when Xia Yubing entered the Sword King's secret realm for the second time did she have the ability to unseal this mystical rune divine weapon. Prince Yuanyi relied on the heavenly sacred 5 elements will to become a prodigy. When Murong Ditian took out the Mara sword, his battle prowess multiplied. And now, when Xia Yubing, who was already incomparably powerful, took out her mystical rune divine weapon, how terrifying would her battle prowess be? Many martial artists held their breaths. Xia Yubing, who had activated her sword intent to the extreme, in addition to the Frosthorn Dragon sword, emitted a powerful aura that almost suffocated them. Swords are indeed important to sword cultivators. However, this is Chu Donglio's sword, not yours. Feeling the sharp aura emitted from Xia Yubing's body, Yi Guqian also frowned. However, he still did not show any fear and faced it seriously. I'll let you experience what a Sword King divine weapon is. Xia Yubing slowly stepped out with the Frosthorn Dragon sword in her hand. Her ice blue hair fluttered. With every step she took, her aura increased by a bit. In addition to the ice sword intent that spread in all directions, the current Xia Yubing was like an ice goddess descending to the mortal world, sending down tribulation. She struck out with her sword again. It was still the glacier sword art from before, but the power was incomparable. An endless stream of icy air swept towards Yi Guqian, as if the glaciers in the heavenly river were reversing. Even the outer true energy barrier was suffused with traces of frost. Yi Guqian frowned as he sensed a terrifying aura. This was the power of the Frozen Horn Dragon sword. God-slaying sword technique, Yellow Springs. Yi Guqian's 1,000 feet wide golden chi sea surged like waves as the Azura power rushed towards the Calamity Dust sword. The Calamity Dust sword, which was originally covered in natural lightning patterns, now seemed to be condensed from blood. It carried a terrifying killing intent. He slashed out with his sword, causing a river of blood to overturn the heavens. That killing intent shook one's mind. Bang! It was as if a destructive explosion had erupted. Boundless sword chi rushed into the sky and spread out in all directions. Cracks appeared on the ground. Cold currents swept through the air, and a bloody light pierced through the sky. However, when everyone focused their gazes, they were shocked to discover that the cold sword chi had directly torn apart the blood river. The remaining sword chi surged violently towards Yi Guqian. Seeing this, Yi Guqian activated the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire in his body. Endless strange flames swept out, wanting to resist Xia Yubing's move. However, Xia Yubing's eyes revealed a cold glint. The corner of her mouth curved into a mocking smile. She activated the Frozen Horn Dragon sword again. Spirit patterns flickered on the sword's body. Like formation patterns, they meandered along the sword's body. Boom! The sword that was already powerful to begin with, under the support of the divine weapon with mystical patterns, erupted with extreme power. Cough! Yiguchin coughed out blood from the corner of his mouth. His figure flew backwards, and the frozen horned dragon crystal armor emitted cracking sounds. Even if it was a spirit-grade defensive divine weapon, it was still somewhat unable to withstand the sword chi of a divine weapon with mystical patterns. In addition, the frozen horned dragon crystal armor had not been fully repaired, so cracks spread out like a spider web. Dong! 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 Yiguchin's feet stepped on the ground, creating a deep pit with each step. That was because he was under extreme pressure from the sword chi. Even his bones were emitting cracking sounds. It was hard to imagine that Yiguchin, who had a perfect physical body and the power of dragons and elephants, was still completely suppressed by Xia Yubing. The frozen horned dragon sword and the ice sword intent, as well as the compatibility of their attributes, erupted with a power that shocked everyone. Seeing Yiguchin being heavily injured by a single sword strike, many cultivators sucked in a breath of cold air. Before, Xia Yubing and Yiguchin had won and lost, going back and forth. But now, after Xia Yubing took out the frozen horned dragon sword, the increase in her battle strength had almost completely crushed Yiguchin. Clang! 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 How could Xia Yubing let go of such an advantage? Her figure fluttered like a fairy, like an ice crane. The frozen horned dragon sword in her hand swept towards Yiguchin. Yiguchin blocked with his sword. With a clang, the calamity dust sword faintly emitted cracking sounds. Not good. Hearing this sound, Su Jianchu's heart was in her throat. Her jade-like hands tightly grasped her skirt, and her charming eyes revealed a nervous expression. Bang! After one strike, Yiguchin's figure was once again pushed back, his blood and chi churning endlessly. Yiguchin, it's over, Xia Yubing coldly shouted. The surrounding cold air seemed to be like rivers flowing into the sea, converging towards the frozen horned dragon sword. On the crystal-like body of the dark blue sword, there seemed to be an illusory image of a hornless dragon. Of course, this phantom wasn't real. It was formed by the power of many spiritual marks stacked together. Shenluo Heavenly Sword. Xia Yubing's sword swept out, and the sword chi of the frozen horned dragon sword violently erupted. This sword move wasn't of the ice attribute, but the fluctuations were still shocking. Could it be a king-grade sword art? Many people cried out in alarm, because the power of Xia Yubing's sword was earth-shattering. No, there are some fluctuations of a king-grade sword art, but it's not complete. The experts of the 7 great powers had high standards, and spoke at this moment. Facing this terrifying sword attack, Yiguchin also had some understanding. This must be the incomplete king-grade sword art that Xia Yubing comprehended in the venerable cave-dwelling sword cavern. Because of the Enlightenment Leaf's support, in addition to the sword cavern's mysteries, Xia Yubing was able to quickly display this kind of supreme technique. Although she couldn't completely display the power of this sword move, she could still display its initial power. An incomplete king-grade sword art? Yiguchin wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Facing this heaven-shaking sword, Yiguchin's gaze sharpened. He swung the calamity dust sword again, and a shocking bloodthirsty aura burst out with a loud bang. At this moment, Yiguchin fully activated the Azura power in his body and poured it into the calamity dust sword. What he held in his hand was a sword that seemed to be completely condensed from blood. What a terrifying power! If Xia Yubing's sword was said to be frightening, then Yiguchin's sword was said to be hair-raising. It was as if they were facing an Azura-killing god. God-slaying sword art. Yiguchin's voice was hoarse, and the Azura power in his body converged into a sword attack, exploding out with a loud bang. 3 paths. God-slaying sword art's 4th move, 3 paths. Boom! A gust of extremely bitter killing intent suddenly surged into the 9 heavens. At this moment, the battlefield was like the Yellow Springs. The incomparably huge sword energy blood river directly split into three, surrounding Xia Yubing and attacking. Its power was 3 times that of the third move, Yellow Springs. Xia Yubing frowned. She also felt a type of terrifying killing power. Her ice sword intent was also activated, increasing the power of this sword strike. Boom! An indescribable explosion rang out. It was as if a star from outer space had exploded. Chaotic sword chi swept out in all directions like raging waves. Numerous cracks appeared on the ground. The sky prides in the distance were blasted back. They had all suffered quite a bit of damage. In the midst of this impact, everyone heard a crisp cracking sound. That was the sound of something breaking. Impossible. Su Jianchu's face was as white as a sheet. In the battlefield, the smoke and dust scattered. Everyone looked over and sucked in a breath of cold air. Xia Yubing's ice hornless dragon sword collided with Yiguchen's calamity dust sword. Spiderweb-like cracks spread across the calamity dust sword. Break! Xia Yubing shouted, and the calamity dust sword exploded. Chapter 204. Bang! It was accompanied by a crisp cracking sound. The calamity dust sword that had accompanied Yiguchen for a long time exploded into countless metal fragments at this moment. Yiguchen's expression froze. He didn't panic at all. With a flick of his wrist, he blocked the sharp fragments with his meteor soft sword. He coughed out blood as his ribs cracked. At the same time, sword chi entered his body, causing him to be injured again. Xia Yubing's chest felt stuffy as many wounds appeared on her arm. She retreated with a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Yiguchen's 3 paths had also injured her. However, by relying on the advantage of her divine weapon, Xia Yubing still had the advantage in this attack. Xia Yubing once again rushed towards Yiguchen and slashed down with her sword. Clearly, she wanted to break Yiguchen's meteor soft sword. Xia Yubing was confident in the power of her divine weapon. Seeing Xia Yubing's actions, everyone sighed inwardly. Su Jianchu clenched her teeth and said angrily, "What kind of ability is relying on a divine weapon?" Many sword cultivators were also silently criticizing Xia Yubing. However, most of them didn't say anything. A divine weapon was also a part of one's strength. Since Xia Yubing had inherited all of the North River Sword King's inheritance, her divine weapon was naturally a part of her strength. However, contrary to Xia Yubing's expectations, her sword didn't break the meteor soft sword as she had imagined. When the 2 swords clashed, dazzling sparks flew. Yiguchen's blood-stained lips curled into a faint smile. Although his meteor soft sword was only a high-grade divine weapon, it was an elite item that had been refined 100,000 times. In addition, it was made of golden ring heavenly silk steel. Such a flexible metal couldn't be easily broken. Yiguchen's hard and soft sword intent was unleashed. The meteor soft sword instantly softened as it clashed with the glacial hornless dragon sword. This displayed Yiguchen's extraordinary battle experience. He skillfully used the hard and soft sword intent. He used the soft sword to dissolve the glacial hornless dragon sword's power. He took the opportunity to counterattack with his steel sword. Of course, Xia Yubing wasn't someone easy to deal with. Her ice sword intent continued to spread, supporting the frozen horn dragon sword. Sword of the Void, 100 waves. Yiguchen shook his sword once again. Waves of void sword waves spread out, shaking towards Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing once again took out the white tortoise shell. Although it was filled with cracks, it still possessed a powerful defensive power. However, contrary to Xia Yubing's expectations, more than half of the void sword wave actually passed through the white tortoise shell, ruthlessly smashing into her delicate body. Cough! Xia Yubing's expression changed as her beautiful face turned pale. She hurriedly used her true qi to suppress the vibrations in her body. That terrifying vibrational force almost instantly caused Xia Yubing to suffer quite a bit of injury. Seeing this, Yi Guqin's eyes glinted like swords. He rushed forward, and his sword vibrated even more violently. His sword wave seemed to resonate with the void, and waves of translucent sword waves overlapped with each other. That fluctuation even far surpassed the might of the hundredfold wave. Sword of the void, thousand waves. A buzzing sound exploded in the void, as if a divine drum had been beaten. The terrifying sword wave swept towards Xia Yubing, wave after wave, like a collapsing dam. No less than 1,000 waves of sword wave. The Sword of the Void was the spirit-level sword technique of the Limitless Sword sect. Therefore, the people who were the most shocked were none other than the people from the Limitless Sword sect. Especially Xianing, who had lost the Void Sword wave to Yi Guqin. Even now, he still hadn't reached great success in the Sword of the Void. How is this possible? How long has it been since I lost the Sword of the Void to him? How could he have reached great success in the spirit-level sword technique so quickly? Xianing couldn't believe Yi Guqin. This child's comprehension of sword techniques can be called monstrous. Even Xian Tai couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. They naturally didn't know that Yi Guqin already had a foundation. Adding his own talent, the seed of the sword heart, and the leaf of enlightenment. With all these factors added together, Yi Guqin was able to master several spirit-level sword techniques in the sword cavern of the Venerable Realm and reach great success in comprehending them. Xia Yubing's expression was also grave as she faced Yi Guqin's ultimate move. She stepped on the ground, and icy sword chi spread out, blocking the void sword wave. At the same time, she once again activated the vast might of the icy hornless dragon sword. On the body of the sword, spiritual patterns lit up, connecting into one. This was a divine weapon with spiritual patterns. It wasn't like a divine weapon with spiritual patterns, which only had a few spiritual patterns. Slash! Xia Yubing shouted. Her icy blue hair fluttered in the wind. She seemed to have returned to being simple. She attacked with an extremely simple sword, but it contained boundless might. Everywhere it passed, the earth turned into frost, and the void froze. Bang! Many ripples erupted in the area. Waves of void sword waves surged in all directions, and a chill surged. Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin were entangled in a battle. With the battle having reached such a stage, there was nothing much to say. The only thing that could be done was to risk their lives, to exchange injuries for injuries. Xia Yubing pointed her sword at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin moved to the side, but his shoulder was struck by the icy hornless dragon sword. Although he had the dragon armor of ice and fire protecting him, it was already full of cracks. It wasn't far from being scrapped. However, at the same time that Yi Guqin was injured, he also erupted with void sword wave, sweeping it towards Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's true chi exploded, but she was still injured. The two retreated, coughing up blood at the same time. However, because of the icy hornless dragon sword, Yi Guqin's injuries were more serious. However, what made Xia Yubing's expression turn gloomy was that although Yi Guqin's injuries were more serious than hers, his blood was surging, and his true chi was surging. His wounds were able to quickly stop bleeding. Therefore, from the looks of it, it was Xia Yubing who was at a disadvantage. Damn it, why is this Yi Guqin's physical body so powerful? His recovery ability is also so strong. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes sank. She discovered that the true chi in her body was showing signs of not being enough. Although Xia Yubing was a proud daughter of heaven, and the scope of her chi far exceeded that of ordinary geniuses, it was still impossible for her to compare with Yi Guqin's 1,000 zhang chi. In addition, Xia Yubing had used the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation before, as well as the sword intent, which consumed a lot of true chi. The bloody battle had continued for such a long time, and even Xia Yubing felt somewhat exhausted. As if seeing Xia Yubing showing signs of not being able to endure, Yi Guqin's attacks became even fiercer. His sword was like a graceful swan, and his sword chi swept out in all directions. Xia Yubing's true qi seems to be somewhat lacking. After fighting for such a long time, why is Ye Guqin still full of vigor, and his true qi is so vast? Even if he had a 20 zhang qi si before, his true qi shouldn't be this vigorous. Many people were shocked, and at the same time, puzzled. The people of the 7 major powers looked at Ye Guqin as if they were looking at a rare animal. Ye Guqin's powerful physical body and vigorous true qi made them tremble in fear. The spectators started whispering, and all of them were discussing. However, it was obvious that many people saw that Xia Yubing's true qi was lacking, so some people gradually thought more highly of Ye Guqin. No. I can't lose. I, Xia Yubing, am a proud daughter of heaven. I definitely can't lose this battle. Xia Yubing waved her sword, and her sword aura was extremely powerful. However, although Ye Guqin's body was covered in wounds, and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, his true qi was still surging, and his blood was flowing like a tide. This made Xia Yubing's heart shrouded in a haze. With her pride, she definitely couldn't lose this battle. Moreover, Xia Yubing knew that if she lost, it would be equivalent to death. After another sword exchange, Xia Yubing's figure stabilized. She looked at Ye Guqin, and her ice-blue eyes surged with an indescribable emotion. Why, Ye Guqin, why is it that in front of Yubing, you are always blocking Ye Guqin's figure? Xia Yubing tightly gripped the frozen nightmare dragon sword, and her knuckles turned white from the force. No matter if it was in the past or now, I'm not blocking in front of you. It's you who can only stand behind me. Ye Guqin's tone was indifferent. The condition of his body wasn't very good either. Even if his perfect physical body had a stronger recovery ability, it couldn't completely heal all his injuries. Therefore, Ye Guqin's injuries were still gradually worsening. However, at this moment, Ye Guqin was waiting with rapt attention, and at the same time, frowning. The frozen nightmare dragon sword and ice sword intent had already been displayed. Ye Guqin didn't understand how Xia Yubing could still fight. Is that so? Heh. Xia Yubing laughed, and an extreme hatred surged in her ice-blue eyes. Since that's the case, then let me, Yubing, personally get rid of you. Xia Yubing's origin ring flashed, and a deep blue jade bottle appeared. Xia Yubing shattered the jade bottle, and a sparkling and translucent ice-blue pill that emitted an endless chill appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Ye Guqin, you forced me to do this. In the following battle, if you can withstand it, Xia Yubing, will stretch out my neck for you to kill. Xia Yubing's ice-blue hair fluttered in the wind. Her blood-stained red lips opened slightly, and she swallowed the pill, as if a goddess had entered a demonic state. Chapter 205. Xia Yubing's move was out of everyone's expectations. Although the martial practitioners didn't know what the ice-blue pill was used for, since Xia Yubing had swallowed it, it must have some effect. Many people's expressions changed. Although the Elite Association didn't have the rule of not swallowing pills in battle, since it was a decisive battle, taking the initiative to swallow a pill would obviously be looked down upon by some people. Even the martial practitioners who supported Xia Yubing didn't clamor anymore. There was a kind of speechless awkwardness. However, Xia Yubing knew that she couldn't lose. Therefore, even if her reputation would be affected, she had to do it. This Ice Soul Divine Pill is another thing I obtained apart from the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. I originally didn't plan to swallow it, but it's all because of you. Xia Yubing looked at Ye Guqin, seemingly filled with endless hatred. With my, Xia Yubing's, talent, I could have broken through to the Divine Soul Realm on my own. I could have completely comprehended the Ice Sword intent and turned it into Sword Dao on my own. But now, in order to kill you, I can only swallow the Ice Soul Divine Pill and forcefully advance. Doing this will harm my Dao Foundation, and may even harm my future cultivation. It's all because of you, Ye Guqin. Therefore, you must die. Xia Yubing's long blue hair fluttered in the wind. Her peerless face seemed to have been possessed by a devil. After swallowing the Ice Soul Divine Pill, her aura rose uncontrollably. A terrifying chill that was enough to freeze the surroundings gushed out from her delicate body. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He naturally couldn't watch Xia Yubing swallow the pill and break through. Kill! Yi Guqin's golden chi si in his dantian was pushed to the limit. The meteorite soft sword pierced out. God-slaying sword technique, 3 paths. 3 incomparably huge rivers of blood of sword chi rushed out with Yi Guqin's sword, attacking Xia Yubing. It's too late. Xia Yubing's eyes were cold. At this moment, divine light circulated on her skin. A powerful aura spread out with her body as the center, forming a storm that spread in all directions. Yi Guqin's sharp sword aura was completely blocked. Xia Yubing's hair fluttered in the wind. Her eyes shone with divine light, as if a goddess was about to ascend. Her half-step divine soul aura also rose once more. All of the spectators were stupefied. Xia Yubing's sudden change was outside of their expectations. Even the people of the 7 great factions narrowed their eyes and wore serious expressions. Xia Yubing's aura rapidly charged towards the divine soul realm. At the same time, an even more terrifying fluctuation was brewing within Xia Yubing's body. That fluctuation. At the edge of the battlefield, Yuan Mie frowned. Only those who possessed sword intent would be able to sense the changes in Xia Yubing's sword intent. Could it be? Not only Yuan Mie, even Yi Guqin, who was at the center of the battlefield, naturally sensed Xia Yubing's changes. Regardless of whether it was the change in the realm or the change in the fluctuation of the sword essence. The effects of the Ice Soul Divine Pill surprised even Yi Guqin. Clearly, the Ice Soul Divine Pill was the same as the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. They were both the most precious treasures of the Sword King Chu Dongliu's inheritance. At this moment, Xia Yubing had consumed the Ice Soul Divine Pill and erupted with a powerful aura. Even Yi Guqin felt that it was a little troublesome. Although she consumed the pill, victory and defeat will be decided once Xia Yubing breaks through. Regardless of whether it was the 7 great factions or the tens of thousands of cultivators, they all had the same thought. The aura and pressure emitted by Xia Yubing made a few Divine Soul Realm experts frown as they felt a faint sense of threat. Since she consumed the pill, then. Yi Guqin muttered coldly. He had never underestimated Xia Yubing. At this moment, Xia Yubing's breakthrough with the help of the Ice Soul Divine Pill made him feel an enormous pressure. Therefore, Yi Guqin also had to have a method to contend against her. As if he had made a decision, Yi Guqin flipped his wrist and took out a simple golden pill with the carvings of the 5 divine beasts. It was the 5-colored golden pill that Yi Guqin had obtained from the barbarian race expert in the bottomless devil abyss. Although Yi Guqin was still unsure of the effects of the 5-colored golden pill, the faint refining power was something that Yi Guqin needed. Currently, his tendon-changing scripture and marrow-cleansing scripture had reached large success. He was just a step away from merging them and cultivating the indestructible diamond body. Right now, Xia Yubing's cultivation was rising steadily. Her sword essence was also undergoing a terrifying change. If Yi Guqin was still hesitating, he might really fall into a great crisis. After making up his mind, Yi Guqin swallowed the 5-colored golden elixir. Seeing that Yi Guqin had also swallowed an elixir, the spectators had a strange look on their faces. Was this a competition to see who had more pills? Xia Yubing, who was in the midst of breaking through, also saw Yi Guqin's actions. Her expression immediately darkened. However, she was confident that Yi Guqin's pill was definitely inferior to her Ice Soul Divine Pill. The originally dust-filled battlefield instantly fell into a short period of deathly silence. However, everyone knew that this was the sign of a storm. Both Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin had taken medicinal pills. Whoever broke through first would be able to seize the initiative and even win. When the 5-colored golden pill entered his body, Yi Guqin knew that it was definitely not just a pill. This was because the 5-colored golden pill did not dissolve at all. Instead, it directly entered Yi Guqin's dantian. At the same time, a powerful suction force surged out from the five-colored golden pill and began to devour Yiguchen's qi and blood. What? Yiguchen was taken aback by this sudden turn of events. Other pills increased one's strength, but this five-colored golden pill was madly devouring Yiguchen's qi and blood. Fortunately, Yiguchen had a perfect body, and he had mastered 2 body tempering techniques. Only then could he provide such exuberant qi and blood. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they would probably be sucked dry in an instant. Although he did not know what this five-colored divine beast golden pill was used for, Yiguchen felt that it was definitely not simple. He activated the qi and blood in his body and poured it into the five-colored golden pill. In front of Yiguchen, Xia Yubing's figure was hidden within the ice storm. However, the ripples she emitted were rising in intensity. Even people as strong as Yuan Mia, Shintu Miao, and the others frowned when they felt Xia Yubing's aura. This suffocating atmosphere lasted for about a quarter of an hour. Rumble, a low rumble came from within the ice storm, as if true qi was exploding and spirit power was shaking. Xia Yubing is about to succeed, she's about to break through to the divine soul realm. Many people cried out in surprise, widening their eyes to see this scene clearly. The gap between half-step divine soul realm and divine soul realm was huge. Boom! Another explosion sounded, and the surging true qi storm spread in all directions. Wind and snow filled the sky, and true qi surged. The blue-haired Xia Yubing was like a goddess breaking out of a cocoon, and her aura was terrifying. Divine soul realm. Not only that, Xia Yubing slowly walked forward. Every single step that landed on the ground gave off a peculiar aura that pervaded the air. She slowly raised her hand, and then slowly pressed it down. Boom! A terrifying ice domain spread out, and instantly enveloped the entire battlefield covered in true qi. Inside the ice domain, endless frost and snow soared, making Xia Yubing look like an ice goddess. Ice Sword Dao, I've broken through, Divine Soul Realm, I've broken through, Yiguchen, what are you going to use to fight me? Chapter 206. Xia Yubing's voice was as cold as water, as if she was speaking to an ice goddess. The surrounding space was filled with coldness. Sword qi was like frost, covering the entire area. Not to mention Yiguchen, who was at the center, even the geniuses who had retreated to the periphery felt a bone-chilling coldness. That coldness was like the tip of a sword pressing against their hearts. He has indeed made a breakthrough. Yuan Mie's deathly still eyes began to ripple. As someone who also possessed sword intent, he knew what realm Xia Yubing had reached. Ice Sword Dao, as Xia Yubing's voice rang out, everyone's faces froze. Numerous gazes seemed to have been nailed onto Xia Yubing's body, unable to leave at all. Even the higher-ups of the 7 major powers, such as Xian Tai and the others, couldn't remain calm. Sword Dao, it really is the Sword Dao. Xia Yubing actually used a pill to break through the bottleneck of the Sword Dao. The charming woman from the Consonant's Divine Palace's higher-ups muttered in surprise. Sword intent, Sword Dao. The difference of a single word was like the difference between heaven and earth. Sword intent was the foundation of the Sword Dao, the initial comprehension. When sword intent transformed into Sword Dao, it would give birth to all sorts of unimaginable Sword Dao techniques, and it could even form a Sword Dao domain. It was just like the ice domain that Xia Yubing was emitting. Within this domain, Xia Yubing's abilities would expand infinitely, and the power of her sword moves would also multiply. Although she had only broken through to the Ice Sword Dao, the domain she emitted wasn't weak. Xia Yubing is truly a genius. Sword Dao, it actually transformed into Sword Dao. What an amazing talent. There were people from the 7 major powers who praised her. Many cultivators who supported Xia Yubing cheered again, their faces flushed red from excitement. Using a pill to break through the Sword Dao isn't stable, Feng Manlu muttered, shaking his head slightly. On the stage, the entire area of the true energy barrier was covered by Xia Yubing's ice domain. Although it was only in the initial stages, its power made many geniuses feel shocked and powerless. Xia Yubing moved gracefully like a goddess, looking down at Yi Guqin, who still hadn't changed much. Looks like Yubing has won this time. Xia Yubing once again took out her frost-hornless dragon sword. At the same time, a powerful aura was released. Although this aura wasn't particularly stable, it did indeed belong to a divine soul realm expert. Yi Guqin's current situation was not very good, because he found that the five-colored golden core in his body was very greedy. Even after devouring so much blood and qi, there was still no reaction. On the contrary, Yi Guqin's body was gradually weakening due to the excessive amount of qi and blood he had devoured. Could it be that I was wrong? Yi Guqin's lips began to turn pale. There was no color in them. His aura was declining. Heh. Looks like your medicinal pill didn't display the effect it should have. Even the heavens are standing on Yubing's side. Xia Yubing coldly laughed. Without saying anything more, she directly attacked. As the frost-hornless dragon sword was swung out, the surrounding ice domain began to vibrate. Countless frosty sword qi swirled around like tornadoes. Yi Guqin used his wave-like subtle steps, but he felt as if he had stepped into a swamp. His speed was twice as slow as before. This was the suppression of Yi Guqin's ice domain. Peng! And within the ice domain, the power of Xia Yubing's sword techniques was greatly increased. She only casually swung her sword, and the frosty sword qi was like a huge snowy dragon that roared and howled, breaking through Yi Guqin's defense. With a puchi, he coughed up blood and flew backwards. The dragon armor of ice and fire was unable to withstand such power, and was on the verge of shattering. Die! Xia Yubing's eyes were cold. She had waited for this moment for too long. Yi Guqin used the fourth style of the god-slaying sword technique again, 3 paths. 3 streams of yellow springs blood rivers of sword qi erupted, but they were once again weakened by the ice domain. Clang! The frost-hornless dragon sword repelled the meteor soft sword, and then under everyone's shocked gazes, it touched Yi Guqin's dragon armor of ice and fire. Break! Xia Yubing coldly rebuked. Peng! The dragon armor of ice and fire exploded into countless fragments. Yi Guqin spat out a large mouthful of blood. His body flew back dozens of feet like a kite with its string cut. Silly boy. Su Jinshi's face turned pale. She wanted to charge out, but she was desperately held back by Zither Fairy and by Yanji. Now that Xia Yubing had broken through with the help of pills, she was the strongest among the prodigies. With the ice domain activated, even Shintu Miao and Yuan Mie were no match for her. At this moment, Xia Yubing was invincible among the prodigies here. Yi Guqin, die! Xia Yubing said coldly. Her tone carried a trace of relief and a trace of pleasure. With her mindset, she naturally wouldn't give Yi Guqin a chance to catch his breath. She stabbed her sword at Yi Guqin, who was flying backwards. Yi Guqin's mouth and chin were covered in blood. He once again blocked with the meteor soft sword. However, at this critical moment, a cold light suddenly stabbed at Yi Guqin's back from the side. That cold light was actually the glacier sword. Everyone cried out in alarm. Su Jinshi's delicate body was trembling. Xia Yubing was extremely scheming. After breaking through to the divine soul realm, she quietly took out the glacier sword, using the storm of icy sword energy to cover it. At the most critical moment, she borrowed the power of her soul to assassinate Yi Guqin, wanting to give him a fatal blow. Yi Guqin, who had blocked the frost-hornless dragon sword with his meteor soft sword, was powerless to block the glacier sword. It's over. Yi Guqin is going to die. Many people shook their heads and sighed. However, Xia Yubing was stunned. She saw that the youth who blocked her sword didn't have the slightest bit of fear on his face. Instead, he was incomparably calm. What other tricks do you have? Xia Yubing couldn't think of any way Yi Guqin could block this sure-kill attack. Rumble, a faint rumbling sound resounded in all directions. It was as if thunder was rolling. What's going on? Is there thunder? Many cultivators were astonished. They looked up at the sky. No, it's coming from Yiguchin. Some cultivators were shocked as they looked at the battle between life and death. Clang! The glacier sword stabbed at Yiguchin's back with a sharp and cold sword energy. However, the expected attack didn't appear. At this moment, Yiguchin's body was trembling like thunder. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Indestructible Vajra body, break. In the next moment, Yiguchin's body emitted boundless golden light. Countless golden scriptures were emitted, as if ancient Buddhas were chanting. Golden light surged on Yiguchin's body. The body metamorphosed scripture and marrow cleansing scripture had completely merged together. At the most critical moment, the five-colored golden core in his dantian had finally started to feed back. Endless blood chi and refining power spread out, helping Yiguchin break through to the indestructible Vajra body. Kacha! Under everyone's shocked gazes, the glacier sword that was stabbing at Yiguchin exploded into a ball of ice crystals. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.